Welcome to a D-pad sleeper video. In this one, we'll be exploring Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, and Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts while trying to jump as little as possible. As this is a compilation of previously released videos, I've trimmed out some unnecessary bits and adjusted the audio for a consistent and smooth watching experience. Or listening, it's up to you. Our journey begins in Spiral Mountain, where we will answer the question, how many jumps does it take to beat Banjo-Kazooie? It's more than one, but a lot less than you might expect. Before we carefully not jump into things, it's important to know a few things. Firstly, in this game there are 9 worlds, each holding 10 jiggies and 100 musical notes. The hub world, Grintilda's Lair, has 10 of its own jiggies for a total of 100. To beat the game, we need a minimum of 94 jiggies and 810 notes. Since this isn't a detailed walkthrough, I'm not going to show each note or shaman token collected, but know that except for one specific spot, I never used a jump specifically to collect notes or tokens. Also for the challenge, a jump is anything where you press the A button and you jump, like with Banjo-Kazooie's Talon Trot, the backflip, the shock spring pad, as well as hopping as any of the transformations. And if you're curious, I won't be using any major glitches like Reverse B Adventure or Furnace Fun moves. For this one, we're going to focus on creative routing and whatever weird tricks I come up with along the way. With the introductions out of the way and a jumpless Spiral Mountain behind us, we approach our first jiggy, which, right from the start, we're forced to start making some tough decisions. We could walk up the first platform, but without any of the other moves we learn later on, a backflip and a single jump are required for the first jiggy. Using that, we could open up Mumbo's Mountain and head inside. Just walking around, the first 60 or something notes, ground pound and talon trot moves are all easily obtained. And at this stone structure we find a jiggy that's so close yet so far. At first it seems like this jiggy is just out of reach, lost to us forever without expending a jump. Well, as it happens, obtaining this jiggy is actually what convinced me that this whole challenge would be worth doing, because, as it happens, this game's terrain can be surprisingly accommodating. You can get onto this slanted block side just by walking up in Talon Trot. From here, you could actually flutter across to obtain the jiggy jumpless. That's great, and I knew I wanted to get those notes in Jinjo as well, and it's here I came up with a neat trick. After using a ground pound, which requires Banjo to be in mid-air, he'll flip out of it, which actually gives him enough of a boost to get up medium-sized obstacles. With this, we could reach the base of the ramp. Ground pounding off the edge won't do much since we will be too low and we won't have enough height to get up. Instead, if we very precisely run off, flutter, turn, and ground pound back on our starting spot, we can actually gain height without jumping in certain situations. This technique is going to be used a lot, so we're going to call it a bird bounce, a name suggested by Mr. Bandito Dorito himself. Moving on, the jiggy on the slope can be grabbed with a bird bounce, and then Conga's orange jiggy also requires no jumps. Here, an issue does arise where Chimpy asks for an orange. There's a bunch of climbable pillars throughout the game, and with few exceptions, Banjo cannot start climbing without using a jump. And don't worry, I tried, but Banjo cannot start climbing out of a damaged recoil. So here, it's 1 jump for the tree, then 2 more jumps to get up Bottle's molehill for a required move, egg shooting. While up here, we could pelt Conga with eggs, which spawns a jiggy, then perform 4 jumps to reach this world switch. Here, you can see another technique that'll be used throughout the video that I call a grounded pound. By using a standing attack that has Banjo walking off the side of a button or anything with a very slight change in incline, in the few frames that he's airborne, you can actually perform a ground pound. This lets us avoid jumping for basically every button in the game. From there, we drop down, get the jiggy that Conga dropped, then head over here. This here is one of those exceptions. This tree can be grabbed just by rolling into it, which is necessary to grab the purple Jinjo jumpless. The jiggy over on Mumbo's hut requires just 1 jump, and then it lets you flutter over and reach the Juju totem pole thing without needing any jumps. I recorded this a bit out of order, but from that center platform you can destroy 1 hut without using a jump, but the other 5 each require 1 jump each, which nets us 2 more jiggies. Like I said, each world has 10 jiggies, so there's actually 1 left up at the top of Termite Tower, but that one takes a total of 9 jumps. Since we don't need 6 of the available 100 jiggies, that tower is a verified no-go zone. Instead, we'll transform into the termite and walk outside. To reach the witch switch jiggy, we need to jump twice. And from there, as we head into Treasure Trove Cove, make sure that we activate the warp cauldron, as that'll be key to our route later on. As for the cove itself, it requires just 1 single backflip to get in. Once inside, this entire world only requires 3 jumps for a total of 9 jiggies and 96 of the notes. So to make this quicker, here's a few tips. You can Talon Trot up to the crow's nest of Captain Blubber's ship, learn flying, and fly everywhere in the level, getting us the following jiggies. lighthouse, shock pad alcove, cliff's edge, Jinjo, treasure chest from the red X, that's really hard to say. Also the treasure chest under the arch, which could actually be grabbed without landing with very precise movement. If you do get stuck inside, you have to jump or reset, which would also cost a jump. When I recorded this, I messed it up, but this is a video describing an optimal run, so in this case do as I say, not as I do. The Jiggy underneath the floating mine can be grabbed jumpless, but just make sure that you lure it over to the edge and damage boost to get out of the water. Nipper, the giant hermit crab, can be defeated by repeatedly flying over, landing on top, then using a rat-a-tat wrap on him. Once inside, I tried using a damage boost from the Jiggy, which might be possible. I had to use one jump to reach it. Captain Blubber's Jiggy requires 2 jumps, getting out of the water and then back out of the ship's hold. With that, we're actually done in this world. The sandcastle contains a bunch of letters, requiring to jump 13 total times to pound out the words Banjo-Kazooie and collect the Jiggy. And that's just, it's a bit too much for us, so we're gonna move on, and once outside, it takes 3 jumps to reach the Witch Switch Jiggy. Moving forward, you'll want to reset the game to avoid expending a jump to get up the cliff outside of the Cove's lobby. On your way back up, make sure to use a bird bounce to reach the shock pad, and then a single jump to reach and unlock Clinker's Cavern. Now to actually get into the lobby, we need to first damage boost onto the pipe, and then carefully perform a bird bounce to reach the platform, and then from there, it's 1 jump to reach Clinker's lobby itself. Once inside the lobby, drop off to the side and smash the button to raise the 3 pipe platforms. Originally, I thought a jump was necessary here, but instead, you could actually just drop down into the water and dive underneath. While editing and scripting the video, I realized that if you intentionally lose a life, you'll get sent back to the room's entrance, at least if you're in Grunty's lair, which completely skips having to jump in this case. Sure, it's super morbid, but with a mission this critical, we'll have to do whatever it takes. Unfortunately, we still have to jump 3 times to get across the platforms. On the other side, luckily all we need is a grounded pound for the button and we find ourselves in Clinker's Cavern. Once inside, it takes 2 jumps to get up to the pipe walkway guarded by Chompas. I had to re-record this section since originally I didn't realize that if you backtrack down that path and then flutter across, you could actually reach the yellow Jinjo, that's usually here, in just a single jump before collecting the rest of that side's notes. Now, in the main room, the only underwater activity that requires jumping is the room with the mutant snippets. Defeating them is actually easy, and you could walk out of the pool of water directly underneath the pipe, but it does take 1 jump to reach the pipe and a very careful bird bounce to reach the Jiggy itself. Everything else underwater, of course, requires no jumps, including raising Clinker. Just make sure that while you're down here, you get the Jiggy at the end of a very long tunnel. Getting up onto Clinker, at least from the fin, seems difficult at first. As it happens, on his left side, there's actually a slope that just barely lets you walk up past his gills. From here, it's 1 jump to the Jiggy, which is otherwise just barely out of reach, and then a single jump for the Jiggy up past his tail. Then you turn around, take the bolt blowhole elevator thing, and use 1 more jump to reach that Jiggy. Now, speaking of the elevator thing, it's actually possible to destroy Clinker's golden teeth by fluttering down from the upper platform and then shooting eggs. Once you've gotten inside and gotten your reward, you want to go back outside. While out here, we need to head into his left gills and get the purple Jinjo, which requires no jumps. Unfortunately, outside, we do need some jumps to get the orange Jinjo. For that one, it's 1 jump from his fin, another jump using the shock pad, and then 1 last jump to get off from the pipe because for some reason whenever you're climbing, if you don't actually jump, you can't detach from stuff. Either way, at that point it takes a grounded pound to reach the orange Jinjo and its Jiggy. With that done, fall into Clinker's blowhole and use a grounded pound on the Witch Switch. However, you could also do what I did, which involves a very overly complicated method of getting airborne by sliding off the wall, running through and dodging the blades nets us another Jiggy. Through that doorway, you'll drop onto a flight pad, which we'll use to fly through the first ring, saving us a jump. For the 4th ring, it requires 2 jumps, and then 2 more jumps for rings 6 and 7. After that, head back outside, and then back through the saw blade room so that you can fly over the Jiggy. If you land, you have to do that process all over again to get to the final room. Here we learn the Wonder Wing ability, and we get the Jiggy of this final level, wait. Run that clip again, me. Slow it down. Slower. Zoom in and tint the video unnecessarily. Oh my god. I jumped. And I didn't say so. I cheated. I'm a fraud. I went ahead and rectified this by making a second file, getting back to this point, and I used that previous technique of sliding off the wall to become airborne, and I got the Jiggy jumpless. Nice. With that out of the way, you'll want to reset the game to save a few jumps. On your way back up, you'll want to do exactly what I did, which is to spend almost a half hour rolling, attacking, and walking over these airball buttons, and this is actually where I realized that grounded pounds were a thing. With those, it's another jumpless Jiggy. We're done with Clinker's Cavern, but not Clinker's Lobby, so getting back into there requires one jump using the previous method. It takes 2 jumps to reach the pipe, and after a lengthy discussion with Brentilda the Witch, you could flutter past to turn and do a grounded pound on the button. With that done, you could swim over and walk up to the pedestal to unlock Bubblegoop Swamp. After that, again, reset the game. The trek up Grunty's lair all the way to Bubblegoop Swamp requires no jumps, but this is the last world in which we could freely reset the game without using a jump. Once inside, it's worth noting that navigating the swamp's waters is difficult but doable. Just use damage boosts or rolls to get up out of the water. The following things require no jumps, just a lot of walking. Defeating the Fibbits as either Banjo or Crocodile, crossing the winding path in the time limit, crossing the thin path in the time limit, just use a grounded pound on the button, the green, orange, and purple Jinjos, stomping Tanktup's feet. Grounded pounds actually do work on all 4 feet, which is weird. And inside of Tanktup, Tip-Tup's choir is actually possible jumpless. You just have to carefully walk up the back of each turtle and perform a grounded pound on every single one. This saves 15 jumps compared to a standard playthrough. And after transforming into the Croc, Mr. Vile's minigame requires no jumps, but you do need to reset after getting his Jiggy to exit his room jumpless. Now, feeding the 2 golden Croctus, I think it's Croctus, required no jump, but the third is at the top of a series of huts. Each hut takes 1 jump, and you can perform a very careful bird bounce on each. So that requires a total of 6 jumps, netting us a witch switch as well as a Jiggy. And the other 2 Croctuses require no jumps, giving us our 8th Jiggy. Now with some careful rolling, we can actually get across the swamp and reach the giant egg jumpless, but it takes a total of 3 jumps to break it and retrieve the 9th Jiggy inside. Lastly, you'll take a lot of damage crossing the swamp, but it takes just 1 jump to reach the blue Jinjo located on a reed back behind the giant crocodile. The yellow Jinjo requires no jumps, which contained our final Jiggy, but it'd probably be better to have the blue one be last so that you could have a death warp out of the level, because you won't have enough life to get back safely anyways. Either way. With the Swamp of Despair behind us, you'll want to make sure to go back to Bubblegoop Swamp's lobby, get damage boosted into this tunnel, grab the boots, and wade over to the snowy room where we need 1 jump to reach the pedestal and unlock Freezeezy Peak. Next, it takes a total of 3 jumps to get up to the series of platforms, which involves 2 different bird bounces. Immediately after the note door, 1 jump is needed to get up the stairs into Gobi's desert lobby. Right after that, you'll want to use 2 more jumps to get up the stairs so that you could reach Freezeezy Peak's entrance, and more importantly, the Warp Cauldron. Later, we could use 1 jump to get into the cauldron to get back here, rather than using 4 or even 6 jumps after a reset. Heading into Freezeezy Peak, it's finally Christmas in insert current month. Again, let's first focus on what could be done jumpless. You can run all the way up the snowman and ride the sled down the ramp and land with the extremely sharp sled blades, knocking a Jiggy out of Boggy. You can learn beak bombing and then get damage boosted from a Sir Slush snowball to reach the flight pad, and with flying, you could easily get the Jiggy from bombing the snowman's buttons, as well as defeating the Sir Slushes, which spawns a Jiggy at the top of the snowman's hat. Just make sure that you hit the witch switch found under one of the Sam Slushes. After getting the Slushes Jiggy, you can leave and re-enter the level to respawn them, which will continue to let you damage boost onto the flight pad whenever you want. Also, make sure that you get the Jiggy inside the snowman's pipe by flying without landing, because I'm pretty sure it costs you a jump to get out. Also, while flying around, make sure to grab the blue present on the snowman's nose and the green present sitting on a small island. Also, the green, purple, and blue Jinjos are easily available. Next up, ground pound onto the shaking box near the Christmas tree, which lets forth the twinklies. After that, you want to hit the button and fly through the star on the top of the tree. It does get a little tricky here, because you need to carefully fly down and then up into the tree, which avoids needing any jumps. Inside, 1 jump will detach you from the pillar, and another jump gets us a Jiggy. On the way down, we can collect the 3rd and final Christmas present. Now, we get to deliver the presents to the kiddos, only for them to spit in our face by spawning a Jiggy on the glass table. Are you serious? Am I a joke to you? It looks like it requires a jump, but luckily, you can actually roll onto the ice chair, and then bird bounce onto the table for a nice Jiggy. Now, you'll want to carefully fly over to Mumba's hut, transform into the walrus, and in this form, you can collect a Jiggy from the bear-hating walrus. You could also race Boggy on the sled. Once on top, the race requires 2 jumps, 1 for each of the houses that you have to overcome. Just like his rude children, Boggy will spawn the Jiggy just out of reach, which can be acquired by transforming back into Banjo, flying over, and landing on it. There's actually another Boggy's race, but we'll have to backtrack after completing Gobi's Valley. For now, as Banjo, collect the orange Jinjo in the cave using one jump, and then the yellow Jinjo in Mumbo's hut with a very careful jump utilizing a damage boost from the torch. That nets us our final Jiggy for this level, at least for now. Heading away from the coldest world, we now have the hottest, Gobi's Valley, which requires no jumps to unlock. It does cost some jumps, however, to get into Gobi's Valley. Specifically, the stairs are a serious barrier. Originally, I thought that we needed 3 jumps while wearing the wading boots. As it turns out, it's actually possible, and better, to use a grounded pound to activate the rotating shock pad, perform 1 jump to reach the second high step, and then a single jump from there. If you're curious, I did try stretching the shock spring jump thing as far as possible so that a bird bounce could get him up there, but it just doesn't seem possible. And if it is, it's probably really precise. Also, the steps are way too deep to be able to use a bird bounce to get up, though if that's possible, we could actually get up there without any jumps, which would be great. Once inside, it's worth knowing that there are flight pads in the empty canal. These let us fly whenever and wherever we want in the world, so it's key that we do everything else in the world before flooding that canal. So, here is the jumpless stuff. Grabba the Sentient Undead Hands Jiggy, the Ancient One's Flying Ring Challenge Jiggy, freeing Gobi and retrieving that Jiggy, but just make sure you don't actually fall off into the sand, because if you do, almost anywhere, it slows you down so much and damages you so quickly, it's quite likely that you're going to lose a life trying to get out. Also, the blue Jinjo is very easy, and the yellow Jinjo doesn't require a jump, but to avoid losing a life, you might want to perform a flyby pickup. Next, entering King Sandy Bud's tomb and racing through the maze is jumpless, and while in the maze, we can hit the witch switch with a grounded pound. Once we reach the final room, we can collect the purple Jinjo by rolling into the vase because it has a really big hitbox for some reason. And reaching the Jiggy requires rolling into the weird collision on its left side. It then requires 1 jump to get out. Getting the Jiggy from helping the Snake Charmer requires 2 jumps, using a strat I literally thought up as I started scripting this line. You could actually jump once, bird bounce onto Ruby's oddly flat head, and then flutter onto the snake's basket. After depositing enough eggs, you'll get raised up to where 1 more jump will net us another Jiggy. You could actually fly over and absolutely obliterate Gobi's spine, which happens to also help Trunker. After that, we can fly back over and retrieve the Jiggy. And following that trend, we could use flight to open up Jinxie's temple. It takes just 4 jumps to ride each of the carpets that get higher and higher and retrieve that Jiggy, and then backtrap, fluttering between each of the carpets. If we perform a rat-a-tat-rap, we could just barely reach the orange Jinjo, but this is another situation where you shouldn't do what I'm showing on screen, specifically because in this situation, if you make the orange Jinjo the last one, the Jiggy spawns up on the carpet and that takes an extra jump or 2 to retrieve it. The optimal strategy that I didn't do but I'm describing is to collect the green Jinjo last, which can be found behind the matching puzzle pyramid. Speaking of, that matching puzzle pyramid minigame is just the worst. I mean, I don't like it in general, but for this challenge it's tedious and at minimum would require 16 jumps, so it's the 3rd no-go Jiggy for this route. It does, however, have a few free notes, which is sort of nice. To finish off the world, you want to run all the way up to Ziggurat, which must be turbo taxing on the legs. Yeah. Oh, that's not funny. Either way, the water pyramid Jiggy requires no jumps, and we're done with this horrid place. I mean, honestly, there's too much sand, it's coarse, and it gets referenced everywhere. Anyways, outside, we want to use a single jump to reach the sarcophagus Jiggy, and then 1 more jump to get dropped down to the Jiggy inside the giant Gruntilda statue. Once down here, we'll want to reset the game and use the Warp Cauldron, which takes 1 jump. Before moving on, heading back into Freeze's Peak and re-racing Boggy requires 2 jumps, which gets us another Jiggy. Back outside, we need to unlock Mad Monster Mansion, which takes 4 jumps to reach the pedestal. After that's done, swim all the way back to here. You have just 1 chance to damage boost up out of the water, so I suggest not getting too close as the slope can keep you stuck in place. As we approach the entrance to Mad Monster Mansion, make sure to break down the gate off to the left. Now for getting into the world, it seems like jumps are required, but remember that weird collision with the sarcophagus in Gobi's Valley? It's the same with these steps. First off, the simple yet spooky jumpless stuff. The Jiggy inside the cellar, as well as the purple Jinjo, are easily obtained, as is the Jiggy rewarded for helping the potted plants, which, if you're curious, are saying thank you, not something inappropriate. It's true, I learned it watching a Game Grumps interview, and not too far away is the orange Jinjo, which is waiting in the corner of the hedge maze. Now, the Tumbler Jiggy minigame, minigame Jiggy, this video is making me lose it, requires just one jump to get onto the thing in the first place. To access the roof, we can actually flutter off the porch onto the pipe to the left of the entrance. From up here, we can carefully flutter over to the gravestone, then start jumping up the church. Altogether, it takes 5 jumps to reach the Jiggy at the very top. I will say that with an incredible precision, you might be able to save a jump at the very top by performing a flutter into a bird bounce on the very small surface of the pole's top, but I wasn't able to pull it off. To get inside the church, we could use a grounded pound to hit the open door button and then easily run through. It takes 3 jumps to get up onto the piano's surface itself. Unfortunately, we won't be doing any playing today. It's very difficult but possible to use grounded pounds to hit the white keys, but not the black keys, at least that's my experience with this infernal keyboard. If you jump for each key, that's 15. If you just jump for the black keys, that's only 6, but even then it's questionable whether or not this is worth it in the first place. It's possible that the Jiggy could be doable and a worthwhile amount of jumps, but in this route, Motzan's tune will go unplayed as our 4th no-go Jiggy, which I really should have come up with a better name for that, but either way. Moving past, it takes 3 more jumps to reach the top of the piano, and then from there we could easily roll onto the ledge, then flutter over to the flight pad, and with flight, we can collect all of the notes and the witch switch in the room, just try not to die to the ghost, like I almost did. Once done inside the church, back onto the roof, we need to break the window on the 2nd floor that looks out towards the fountain. The game suggests aerial attacks for breaking windows, but pooping an egg right up against the wall is more than enough because why not? After that, it's a single jump to reach the roof of the mansion. While up here, we can actually get in and out of the 3rd floor windows without jumping, but the yellow Jinjo does require 1 jump. It takes a jump to reach the green Jinjo, and then 2 more jumps to get up into the chimney using the shock pad. Once inside the house, 1 jump gets us on the chair, and then 1 jump on a table to nab the napping nabber's Jiggy. After leaving the mansion, you'll want to use a jump for the blue Jinjo, which I left for last for some reason, which also gives us a Jiggy. At this point, we need to use a backflip to reach Mumbo's hut. Or do we? No, we actually don't. You're intended to, but instead we could actually run across the thorn-covered wall using the Wonder Wing ability to avoid damage, then flutter across to a very slow, painful, jumpless victory. Once you've transformed into a cute little pumpkin. In my original route, I thought it was optimal to walk into the opening in the well and jump once to collect the Jiggy. Instead, you could actually just roll attack spam as Banjo to get into the well, and then swim down, get all the notes, get the Jiggy, and then death abuse to warp out to the start of the level, meaning that no jumps are required. As pumpkin form, it is needed to collect the gutter basin Jiggy. Also, we need 1 jump to get the pumpkin into the 2nd floor window, since the recoil from the bat doesn't seem to be enough. The Skeleman on the inside is damaging enough to boost us into Lago's toilet. Once that Jiggy is collected, we could death abuse to warp out of that septic tank and then leave the level. Heading down to the path to the right, it takes just 1 jump to get into the water level button building, and you could actually walk up to the transformation button, even though it's very difficult. If you then roll into the side of the coffin closest to Mumbo while spamming the trigger button, it's possible to ground pound thanks to that weird collision from earlier, breaking the lid. I carefully did that again, landing on the edge and ground pounded the button while flipping back out, but the game decided no, you should just stay in the coffin. But thanks to the button providing just enough height to get another bird bounce, we got out of there without any jumps. After turning back into the pumpkin and leaving, unfortunately, at this point, if we die, we respawn at the house's entrance, and getting a game over would require a jump anyways, so from here we need 1 more jump to leave the lobby. Heading away, Mumbo's magic will run out, and we can move on. Before we leave the spooky and icy areas behind us, we'll want to clear the cobweb crater using eggs. Afterwards, using 2 jumps will get us up to the flight button, which can be hit with the grounded pound. After racing over and taking flight, we can collect the Free Zizzy Peak Switch Jiggy, and then take flight once more and get the Mad Monster Mansion Jiggy. Now we're ready to unlock Tetanus Shot Bay, which requires 1 jump to get us out of the water. From there, using some nice movement and a grounded pound, we could raise the water level jumpless. However, we do need 1 more jump to get out of the water. And then after unlocking the world, it's another jump to get out of the room before heading into the bay itself. Before doing so, however, it's worth noting that it's possible to backtrack into Freeze's Peak and farm extra lives without needing any jumps, which is going to be very handy because Rusty Bucket Bay is an absolute death trap. Definitely not OSHA approved. There's like no handrails anywhere. It's a dangerous place. I say this because anytime we fall into the water, it's a confirmed death because it takes one jump to get up onto any of the ladders. Heading off to the left, after breaking the skylight with an egg, it's possible to hold down and left on the analog stick while spamming the A button. Inside the submerged warehouse, Banjo spawns up in the air, so this lets him flutter down right onto the Jiggy. Afterwards, we do need a death warp. Next, one jump gets us up onto the buttons, where we need to grounded pound out 312-111 for another Jiggy. Originally, I had it routed so it would take 3 total jumps to retrieve the Jiggy covered by the crane's cage. Instead, by fluttering over after the whistle Jiggy, you could actually get up and over to the button's jump list. Then, if you're very quick about it, you can actually flutter and bird bounce on a ladder, then fling your whole body down to just barely reach the Jiggy in time. So much pain in the name of saving 3 Wahoos, but it was worth it. Afterwards, we could plunge into the toxic oily water and swim into the anchor room. From here, like before, it takes one jump to get out of the water. We could then ground and pound the switch to save Snorkel the dolphin. Good for him, I guess. And then one more jump to get back out of the hallway, retrieve the Jiggy, and then drown. It's necessary, trust me. Next, we need to fight this level's boss. It takes 4 different jumps to reach the crane's rope, hit that switch to drop the TNT, and carefully bird bounce to get onto the crane's ladder. Before dropping into the ship's hold, use one jump and flutter over to the witch switch. From there, drop down and just beat the crap out of some boxes, until the Russian nesting doll of a boss gives you a Jiggy. Unfortunately, there's no water drowning, or enemies to fling your body upon, and resetting the game will still take a jump, so at this point we need one jump to get back up onto the ladder. From there, the last thing we need to do on the deck is to break this circular window with an egg, and then flutter into the captain's quarters. One jump is needed to reach that Jiggy. Afterwards, another death warp. The last thing we need to do in this level is to break open this door and drop down into an emotional meat grinder of a room. This is the engine room, and I imagine many lives were lost over the years to its unforgiving infinite void, obnoxious spinning objects, and trying to get back out under a time limit. Well, I've come up with a decent strategy. First, you want to fail for about half an hour, it's very necessary. Next, very carefully flutter off to the left and land on the middle gear. Once it rotates around to the right, transition to the biggest gear, and from there it's one jump onto the next platform. But it might be possible to do this without a jump, especially if you can get onto the gear's highest part with the bird bounce, but I was not able to do this, but it's worth mentioning. From there you could easily get to the far right switch without any jumps. Now the real strat here is to line yourself up with the spinning propeller, walk into it and take damage, then immediately jump through. It's a kind of cheese method, but it does work and it saves us from hitting the switch in the adjoining room. That gives us a Jiggy. From there, we need to repeat the strategy again with one jump and then hit the switch. Now, we're racing against the clock to retrieve the Jiggy behind the ship's propellers, and death means failure. To save jumps and heartache, we could actually run up right against the seam between the wall and the glass, and Banjo should just slide right through, one of the few glitches in the route. From this room, it takes one jump onto the ladder, and then a casual stroll into the water to retrieve the Jiggy before yet another death warp. Now before we finish with this world, there's actually one final Jiggy that we need to get. Originally, my route had us using 6 jumps to access the Smokestack Jiggy. However, I figured out it's possible to get all 5 Jinjos in just 4 jumps. Here's how. The yellow Jinjo is stranded on a buoy guarded by Snacker the Shark. He's actually key because he lets us damage boost up onto the Jinjo without jumping. Afterwards, he also helps us death warp easily. The green Jinjo is on a barrel floating in toxic waste, which requires a few careful flutters and then one jump. The blue Jinjo is inside the middle of 3 shipping containers, which can only be accessed from atop. Use a backflip and bird bounce to reach the top box, then carefully bird bounce box to get up. Dropping down into the container, we could easily reach the blue Jinjo, but it's impossible to leave without jumping, so a death warp is necessary. Now from the same area, we need to intentionally jump into the death water. You see, from here, if you jump, flutter, and quickly backflip, you can actually reach this area in just 2 jumps. Pay the troll toll, then dip, duck, dodge, and dive past the Champas and collect the orange Jinjo. Once more, we plunge into that oily liquid and swim over to collect the purple Jinjo and the final Jiggy of the world before succumbing to that whole lack of oxygen thing. With Rusty Bucket Bay behind us, we're in the home stretch. Just one final world to overcome, but first, we need to actually get there. Heading out of that hellscape, since the bomb won't come close enough, it takes one jump to get out of the water to reach the witch switch Rusty Bucket Bay Jiggy. From there, we want to spam some eggs towards the grate and it should break. Then one jump to get into the tunnel. After a grounded pound to raise the water, it's one more jump to get out of the water. Once through the tunnel of Vine Whippery, activate the warp cauldron. It takes 3 jumps to reach the button that spawns the Click Clock Woods jigsaw puzzle pedestal. Then we can reset the game. After getting out of the water to reach the pedestal, which is just one jump, we then have to reset again. Running up to this room, get damage boost, then use one more jump to get into the cauldron. Finally, we get to enter the Legend of Zelda 4 Seasons Hotel Mario Woods 3D world. Anyways, this world is different in the sense that its Jiggies, Notes, and Jinjos are spread across 4 versions of the same map for the 4 different seasons. While I'm not covering each one specifically, it's worth noting that you want to probably collect the Shaman tokens while going through each season before looping back to Spring for the bee, like I do. Now, on our first visit to Spring, we have 2 goals. First is to head up the tree's spiraling path, fall off the giant beehive, and land, just like so, in this plot of land. Getting damage boosted over the wall also works. By dropping some eggs into the hole, a giant plant will sprout which also lifts Banjo up, letting him get out of the fenced area without a jump. All the way back up the spiral path again, it takes 1 jump to reach the shock pad, 1 jump using that pad, and then 2 more jumps to get across the alcoves to reach the treehouse section. After a few flutters, we could grounded pound the summer button. Now from here, we'll want to ignore the desperate cries of help from the giant egg, as hatching, feeding, and retrieving the Jiggy from Eerie the bird is just not worth it at all. In summer, we want to turn left and grab the yellow Jinjo hiding in the grass near the entrance. Also be sure to beak bust boulder blocking bumbling beavers home so that we can get that Jiggy later. All the way up the spiral path again, grounded pound into the hive and use the Wonder Wing ability to murder a bunch of hornets, which gives us 1 Jiggy. Afterwards, it takes 1 jump to leave the hive. After that, carefully drop off to the right side of the hive and ground pound Gobi to force him to water our eggplant flower sprout. Afterwards, use his sleeping form as a slope to get up onto the leaf and then out of the fenced area. After that, we can smack the autumn button and head into that season. Once in the land of dying trees and red leaves, we can swim into Naughty's burrow. Oh, right, that's the word. And then use a jump to get out of the water and retrieve the Jiggy. Once more, we'll need to drop down from the hive and land on Gobi like so, because while he runs off, he actually will happen to displace us onto the leaf, letting us leave the fenced area yet again. And then, you know what we do? We actually get the orange Jinjo off to the left and then run back up the tree, flutter down from the hive, and then we get the Jiggy, all without jumping. Again, we'll need to perform the same 4 jumps as earlier to reach the treehouse and the Jiggy it contains, and then from there, we can actually flutter over to Nabbit's home and accept his mini quest to collect 6 acorns. Like the rest of the video, there might be some room for optimization, but here's my breakdown. It takes 1 backflip for this acorn, 1 jump flutter for the nearby acorn which drops us onto the 3rd acorn. On the way back, there's another acorn down a steep ramp, and then it takes 2 more jumps to get the acorn inside of his bedroom, and then the final acorn requires just 1 jump to get inside of the flood room that he owns for some reason. After turning in the ransom, we get our Jiggy. From there, it requires 3 jumps to reach the winter button. At this point in my route, I was really down to the wire with notes, so I used 1 jump to get onto the nest and collect all those notes. After that, we should be able to backtrack without any jumps and flutter down onto this Jiggy. For the final season, winter is here. Using the flight pad in front of Mumba's hut, we can fly all the way to the top of the world, bust down the door, and grab that Jiggy waiting inside. Flying even higher will let us retrieve the Jiggy from the highest platform, and then with another flight, we can hit the witch switch. At this point, we should be able to transform into the cute, cuddly bee Banjo. I just realized he would make like a great plush, am I right? If we want to take flight, we need to be airborne. So in order to avoid having to jump, we need to walk across the thorns, fall off a ledge, and start flying mid-air. Inside the hive is the purple Jinjo, and we could use that same strategy to take flight without jumping. Back again at the very top is the green Jinjo. With the power of editing, we could then go to winter, again, collect the blue Jinjo, and its Jiggy, and then just go back, transform into bee again, and leave spring. We need to leave the world, which can be done by taking flight after stepping off the side of the very tiny bridge. And outside, we need to perform 1 jump so that we could reach the final Jiggy of the game. From there, we could fly towards the next challenge. Behold, Grunty's Furnace Fun, the witch's twisted version of a board game. There are a number of different spaces. On visual, music, and grunty spaces, we must answer a question of some sort. For each wrong answer, we get magically zapped and lose a honeycomb. If we fail a sudden death square or lose all of our health, we will get dropped into the lava, which is not good. Our biggest worry here, ironically, is the challenge squares. Activating one of those would force us to take part in one of 6 different minigames. 2 of those minigames, the memory matching and the sandcastle spelling, require either 16 or 12 jumps respectively. I mean this respectfully, no, I'm not doing that. So the strategy here is to navigate across the board, answer every Joker space possible, which gives us free skip a square cards, which we then prioritize on challenge squares. This board challenges the mind, the senses. I had to draw upon 17 years of experience with this game, over 40 hours of being immersed throughout the process of making this video, all so that I wouldn't answer incorrectly when asked which character goes blah, 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 blah. Really? This whole board is like super easy, let's be real, with the exception of the grunty squares. The issue there is that the answers for those questions change for every single playthrough. There's many different patterns that it could be. The specific answers can actually be learned by Brentilda, but it's just so boring having to listen to her. So you could use a tool like I did called Furnace Fun Calculator 2.0, released by a speedrunner named Mittens. While guessing at the grunty questions, it lets me input which answers are correct for which questions, and it narrows down which grunty answer pattern I have. We could avoid that, just guess, and eventually we'd get through. But with that tool, I got through the board in like 15 minutes. I may have taken longer than necessary, but once 2D's saved and the board is behind us, we can continue up the layer, turning in the last of our jiggies and notes before speaking with trusty old Dingpot. His price is just one single jump to get in the cauldron and soar up to the final battle. Spread in between each short wall is either red feather, egg, or yellow feather. This grand finale against Gruntilda Winky Bunyan herself is split into 4 phases. So to ensure victory, I kinda dodge Grunty and collect resources for like 5 minutes. With that done, in phase 1 we must dodge Grunty's dive bomb attempts, before retaliating with eggs. After she's had enough, she'll toss a powerful homing magic attack, which should be blocked with the Wonder Wing. After that, she'll switch to lobbing slow moving fireballs that try to predict Banjo's movement. The intended strategy is to dodge, look for an opening, hop onto the wall, and shoot some eggs. It's possible to get up there with a damage boost, but we could just barely hit her from the ground level with eggs. It's super finicky, but we're able to complete phase 2 jumpless. In phase 3, we follow Gruntilda into the air. While dodging fireballs, we need to look for openings and retaliate with beak bombs. Once she's had enough, she'll stand her ground while shooting fireballs repeatedly while mixing in some of those powerful homing attacks. It's at this point our saviors arrive, the Jinjos. After expelling eggs from Kazooie into every statue possible, the Jinjos harness the power of Captain Planet, form the Jinjonator. And once it takes flight, we have officially beaten Gruntilda without jumping and completed Banjo-Kazooie while jumping as little as possible. Finally, I can answer the question that I asked at the start. How many jumps does it take to beat Banjo-Kazooie? It's like 163, assuming I counted correctly. This is my first time tackling a project like this, and I gotta be honest, it ended up being way more work than I expected. Still, I really enjoyed making this video, and I hope that you, if you somehow made it this far, enjoyed watching it. I'd love to hear if anyone comes up with a way to make the route the opposite of jumpier. But for now, I think I'm gonna take a hint from Banjo and get some rest. Be sure to like the video, subscribe or whatever, and insert some sequel bait about Banjo-Tooie that may or may not be ever fulfilled. See you later. It has been 1 year since Gruntilda the Witch was defeated by vertically challenged Banjo and Kazooie, and after all this time, we must ask the question, how many jumps does it take to beat Banjo-Tooie? If you saw my video for Banjo-Kazooie, then you pretty much know what to expect. If not, just know that we're aiming to beat the game with as few jumps as possible. I should say, I'm not the first person to try this challenge, but I did the whole thing without looking at anyone else's jumpless attempts, so that I could actually, challenge myself. As for guidelines, a jump is a jump. It's as simple as that. You press A, the character jumps up and falls back down. I know a lot of people want to argue semantics, but just know a jump is a jump and that's final. Also, I will not be using any major glitches. In the first one, that meant no furnace fun moves or reverse B adventure. Here, that means no wrong warping to the final battle. Oh, and fair warning, the number of jiggies I have in one clip and the number we've looked at may not match up because I'll be presenting each objective in the most logical order that I could come up with, while actually recording the footage, I was not optimal at all. Now, I think that's enough preamble. Let's just, not jump into things. Following the return of Gruntilda and the tragic unaliving of Bottles, we set off from Spiral Mountain in pursuit of the Hag 1. Immediately, we have a mini-boss against the witch's dopey minion, Klungo. This fight repeats 3 times throughout the game, and the order in which the potions appear differ from one save file to the next. It just so happened that for this one, he used the red potion, which allows him to grow in size after using his volley of projectiles. This is by far the simplest, just attack him right after he finishes growing, easy as that. As you can no doubt tell, this whole thing doesn't require any jumps, but it's worth pointing out that Banjo's forward roll has been upgraded considerably from the first game. In this one, it travels a bit further, a bit faster, and it's controllable mid-roll, which makes it very useful. After that fight, we emerge into a partially destroyed Jinjo village. Here is a good place to bring up the fact that Jinjos in this game are collectibles independent of the individual worlds. Whenever you reunite a whole family, you get a Jiggy, and the color of each Jinjo is randomized at the start of the file. Since there's no real standard layout, I just sort of went with what I had. As a result, I'll be discussing the location of Jinjos and their collectability later on, after we've collected more of the moves. I should also mention this is where we find our first Jam Jar Silo. These metallic structures give us access to the game's overworld fast travel, which makes navigation way easier than in the first. As long as we can reach the next hub silo, any potential backtracking won't require any additional jumps. Running up the hill and up the thankfully smooth stairs, we find ourselves in King Jingaling's throne room. It's here that he gifts our duo with their first Jiggy, and also in that same cutscene, from very far away, Gruntilda fires the B.O.B., sucking the life out of the Jinjo King. Ouch. Leaving more wreckage behind, our only path forward is through Bottle's underground home. Speaking to Goggles, we can get the Amazo Gaze glasses, which simply allow us to zoom in and out while in the first person mode. I never actually used this, but it's still nice to grab. Running past his wife and not talking about what we know, we move through Specky's room and take the hidden exit into the Wooded Hollow. Here we unlock another silo before entering Jiggy Wiggy's temple. This is the home of the titular puzzle piece Faced Priest, who allows the Baron Bird to attempt Jiggy Wiggy challenges when the appropriate number of puzzle pieces have been collected. With our one Jiggy, we can attempt and easily beat the challenge to unlock World 1 Mayhem Temple. Right out of the gate, things are again different from the first game. While there's still 100 musical notes to collect per world, they're divided into 16 nests of 5 and 1 nest of 20. Much like in the first video, I won't cover how to get each of the notes, but know that I never used a jump for any of them. On the topic of notes, they're used to convince Jamjars the Mole to teach our duo new moves, the first of which being egg aiming. This comes in handy all over the place, especially to take out the Gobbles terrorizing Bovina's farm. I just realized how great that name is, giving us our first Jiggy of this world. Nearby, we'll come across one of this world's warp pads. These, once activated, allow the duo to teleport between them freely, which greatly simplifies how we'll tackle exploration. Next, we'll learn the Breagle Blaster move from Jamjars on the cliff overlooking the small lake. This is used in special first-person shooter areas, like inside Target Zan's temple. As for the challenge in said temple, you can't jump in here even if you wanted, so this whole thing is of course jumpless. From this, we get one Jiggy from Target Zan's slightly sacred chamber, and another Jiggy for defeating Target Zan himself. Back outside, our next stop is inside Mumbo's skull. Much like his home, Mumbo's role has changed. Rather than transforming the Baron Bird, he can be paid 1 Globo in exchange for his magical services, which he performs on any relevant Mumbo pads. Here, this is done so that he can raise and control the Golden Goliath. This giant golden golem is used to kick a hole through the stone door below the bridge, break the rock covering the flight pad, kick open the doors near the world entrance, and collect the Jiggy floating above the island in the quicksand. Once that's done, we can return Mumbo to his home, which requires us to walk him up the side of his chair, or use a damage boost because the front of it is actually not accessible jumpless. As the duo, we can then revisit the Jade Snake Grove hatch to learn Grip Grab, which lets Banjo grab onto ledges. The last Jiggy we want to collect for now is atop Targazan's temple. You could fly to it, but I opted to use the bird bounce, aka what I call where you step off a ledge and immediately ground pound to scale small ledges. That said, for now the rest of the collectibles are either impossible to get jumpless or require moves learned later on, so we'll move on. Access to Jiggy Wee's temple requires 4 Jiggies and we're up to 6, so it's no problem. One puzzle later and we've unlocked Glitter Gulch Mine. That done, our next stop is Sad Town, population us. Everything thus far has been done without requiring extra effort from poor Banjo's legs, but this grippable ledge is too great a foe. If you're curious, we can bird bounce up onto the platform below the ledge, but as far as I'm aware, none of our current tools will get us up there. A bird bounce doesn't get us high enough to grab it, and we can't even grab a ledge during the ground pound's recovery animation, so we must expend a single jump to reach the upper ledge. Unfortunate, but once we reach the plateau, we can unlock the silo and we'll never have to look at that cursed ledge again. Also here, we can speak to Jam Jars to learn the Fire Egg ability. These eggs deal more damage than normal eggs and are helpful in certain situations, like hitting the switch nearby, which opens up the path to the Pine Grove. In here is another silo and a hatch where we can learn Grenade Eggs. As you might expect from the name, grenade eggs explode. This allows us to damage boost ourselves almost anywhere, which is extremely useful. Heading back to the plateau, I should mention that the large beehive is home to Honeybee, who provides our duo with extra health slots in exchange for empty honeycombs. While I tried to collect as many of these as possible, having extra health isn't necessarily required, so for the sake of brevity, I won't be covering every honeycomb in the game. Just know that, much like the music notes, I never used a jump to collect any of them. Heading into Glitter Gulch Mine jumpless, we can either damage boost ourselves or simply talon trot over the left side of the wooden frame. Once inside, the layout might seem daunting at first, but the minecart track that runs through it is more than enough to allow us to reach all main sections of the primary cavern. From the entrance, we can step on a button, which opens up a gate long enough for us to race through using some speedy shoes. This gives us access to the Waterfall Cavern Jiggy. That done, I went ahead and made the duo forcibly respawn. This game doesn't have a life counter, so deaths are more of a tool than a hindrance. After that, we'll want to get another useful ability, which is sadly unreachable jumpless. So I ran up the nearby slope to get up to the cabin, and then used one jump to reach the platform with the hatch. Now, the Bill Drill ability is ours, allowing us to hold the shoulder button when using a ground pound to instead perform a drill attack, which is required to break certain objects. One such object is actually back in Spiral Mountain. While I did this way later than I should have, you can come here, use a grenade egg to damage boost onto the boulder, and drill it apart to uncover Banjo's pet fish Royston. After delivering him to Spiral Mountain's pond, he'll teach us how to swim faster and increase our air supply while underwater. It's not required, but it's very useful. Another Bill Drill location is actually back in Mayhem Temple. Now is when I'd suggest getting this Jiggy, but as you'll see throughout the video, the actual order is, it's all over the place. So back in the temple, we'll need to pay a Globo to a new character named Humba Wumba, which allows us to transform into a Stony. For now, the Stony's only purpose is to speak with another of its kind, stationed near the prison complex to get the code needed to open the cell, which is different for every playthrough. After that, we'll want to go die or scale up the stairs back to Humba Wumba's wigwam. If you're curious, you can actually get up the staircase by using his shoulder bash attack at a very precise angle. Fun fact, I guess. As the Baron Bird, we can then backtrack to the prison, damage boost onto the rock, drill it open, and then Delberta the Mole can be reunited with her friend Bully and Bill over in Glitter Gulch Mine. Once we get onto the table, we can get another Jiggy. After that, we can take on the Ordnance Storage Challenge. To get in there, we can use these sloped walls to get onto the large boulder and drill it open. This is another one of those Golden Feather sections, but rather than shooting, we'll be using a newly obtained ability called the Beak Bayonet. Slay. After stabbing our way through all of the TNT bundles and the time limit, Bully and Bill gives us another Jiggy. After that, we might as well head into the wigwam, pay a globo, and transform into a cute little detonator. This little guy is used to blow open the pile of rocks, blocking the cave, holding the abomination that is Canary Mary. With either grenade eggs or by detonating ourselves, we can blow open her cage. After that, it's back to Humbo Wumba's tent, transform into our animal forms, and speak with Canary beside her newly renovated minecart. She challenges the duo to a race, which is the epitome of rubber banding. As long as you match her pace and pull ahead at the very end, it's fairly easily done. The first victory gives us the Jiggy, while the second is a useless Cheeto Page, and after the second, she leaves to show up again in a later world. At this point, we should visit Mumbo's skull, though its surrounding ledges at first seemed far too daunting. Sure, a damage boost can get us up to the first little bit, but the rest are too high for a simple bird bounce. I didn't realize this till way later, but the build drill ability actually gives Banjo more height during his recovery flip, meaning that this upgraded bird bounce is enough to get us all the way up here. It's truly magical. Before heading into the skull, getting up here also allows us to flutter over to the nearby sign and then onto the boulder in order to drill it open. Excellent. Oh, and there's also a globo behind the rock, which is important to grab. After taking control of Mumbo, we'll want to warp over to the crushing shed, where his magic lifts a boulder into said shed of crushing, and then visit the train station and lift the train back upright. While cruel, the best way to get Mumbo back to his skull jumpless is to take an intentional death, which always returns him to his home's front door. As Banjo-Kazooie again, the train station looks like it might need another jump. In order to get inside, you're supposed to jump up and grab onto the small ladder to get into the doorway, but I was desperate for some kind of alternative. I tried damage boosting, I tried climbing up the front and seeing if we could somehow get on top of the train. None of it worked. The solution, as it happens, was actually right in front of us all along: the ladder. Its collision hitbox is weird, and for whatever reason, if we run or roll into it from the right, there's a little bit where Banjo actually gets lifted into the air. It's pretty hard to do reliably, but running at this spot and spamming the R button will eventually allow us to start a ground pound, which makes Banjo latch onto the ladder, letting us get inside jumpless. Once inside, it's a damage boost to get inside the furnace to take on Old King Cole himself. I did this when I had ice eggs, but normal eggs or grenade eggs would do the trick just fine. Beating him into submission nets us another Jiggy, and then we can damage boost ourselves up and out of there. As for the crushing shed, it's very easily done jumpless, netting us another Jiggy. Near the crushing shed is a tunnel that takes us to a TNT hut. This requires the detonator to blow apart, and after that's done, we're able to head down into the flooded caves. This maze at first can be a bit confusing, but you need to just go straight into the central chamber, take a right, and then a left, which brings us to the Jiggy's room. This is where we would normally jump out of the water, but that's not happening. Instead, we can actually aim and fire a grenade egg into the wall like so, which is enough to get us up and onto solid land for another Jiggy. Backtracking, if we head down the stairs near Mumbo's skull that we opened earlier, we'll pass by a Jinja, which I won't be collecting until later for the sake of clarity. There's also another boulder to damage boost onto and destroy. This gives us access to the Power Hut, which is where you're supposed to do some overly complicated stuff to light up the path. Instead, if your TV brightness is high enough, you can easily make out the path and collect the Jiggy jumpless. Now we're up to 14 Jiggies, which is more than enough to unlock World 3, Witchy World. This is entered through the Pine Grove, which we've already unlocked. Our first task is to learn some new abilities. Behind the big top tent, we can learn Split Up, which allows Bango and Kazoozles to go out on their own. Kazooie obviously moves faster and is great for air-based stuff, while Banjo is slower, weaker, and has some interesting mechanics with his pack. We also want to learn Airborne Egg Aiming from Jam Jars over in Space Zone, which does what it sounds like. And over in the Western Zone, we can damage boost onto the pads, split up, and have Banjo damage boost onto where the hatch is to learn Pack Whack. This lets him use his pack as a weapon, which is more useful down the road because it slightly extends his in-air hang time. With these skills in hand, we can obtain the Mr. Patch's Jiggy Jumpless because no matter what you say, taking flight is not a jump, and I am sticking to that. From there, the only other golden puzzle piece we can collect right now is the one from bringing the Cactus of Strength, also in Western Zone. I collected this way later than I could have because I initially thought it was near impossible jumpless. The edges of the button aren't enough to initiate a ground pound, and you normally can't get onto a pole without jumping. I did start to formulate a very wacky strat where I would need to bird bounce onto the very thin sign, then flutter over and hit the button. Luckily, much like with the train station, the solution is way simpler. If you roll straight into the pole, the weird collision will get Banjo right up onto it. Neat. With that, we can pretty easily hit it once, hit it twice, hit it a third time to collect another jumpless Jiggy.
Strength.
After that and a bit of boring note collecting, we can head off to unlock the next world, Jolly Roger's Lagoon. This requires 14 Jiggies and we're up to 16, so it's no problem. Also, the path to get there via the plateau isn't difficult either. Once we're at the cliff top, we can learn ice eggs from jam jars, run along the cliff to unlock another silo, and head into the lagoon itself. In here, there are a few things we can do. A grenade egg can blow open the plaza statue to reveal some split up pads, which can be reached with a couple of damage boosts. For now, it's a good time to split off and take Kazooie into this cave to learn the wing whack ability. Also, there's a number of doubloons scattered around that we'll want to grab. Some of them are underneath patches of rocks that can be blown open with a grenade, though they need a damage boost to get back out of the hole. With some notes and coins in our pocket, we can head into the tavern to hear Roger's not so jolly sob story, and pay 2 doubloons to open the guest bedroom's door so that we can learn underwater egg aiming, which does what it sounds like. Also, we'll want to perform a bit of indoor parkour to make our way onto this chair, across onto the counter, and then over to this stool, all so that we can shoot a grenade through the opening in the wall to blast open the outer wall, which will come in handy later. Some more parkour can be used in Pano's shop to reach the Globo hanging out above his counter. It's a bit tight, but you can damage boost onto his counter, flutter and bird bounce onto the box, and then bird bounce to get up onto the ledge. With that Globo, we can bribe Mumbo into casting a spell that makes the sun stronger. This lets us breathe underwater, which is, yeah, that makes sense. Heading down into the lake, you'll find that over half this world's content is actually underwater. Usually, water levels are the worst, but this one is actually welcomed since you don't need to jump underwater. After reaching and activating the warp pad in Atlantis, we'll want to head into the electric eel's lair. Near the top, there's another one of those dreaded ledges. As far as I'm aware, a simple damage boost isn't feasible, so we must use one jump to get up out of the water. This is a worthwhile sacrifice because the ability we learn from Jam Jars is the Talon Torpedo, which is actually required to reach the next Isle of Hags area, which in turn opens up many possible Jiggies. Also in Atlantis, we'll want to shoot eggs into the statues to open up the temple, and assist Chris P. Bacon in order to earn a Jiggy. There's another Jiggy we can grab from within a transparent sea fish using Talon Torpedo. And heading down into the Big Fish Cavern, we can blow apart the fish's teeth, which I'm just realizing would be really painful, venture inside, and free Mary Maggie, who heads back to the tavern. When we visit, Jolly will reward us with a Jiggy. Lastly, we can visit Humbawamba, pay her a Globo, and turn into a submarine. This allows us to take on the mine shooting minigame for a Jiggy, as well as easily take on and destroy Lord Angerfish himself for another Jiggy. That done, we can head back up and break open the doors to the UFO. Inside are some aliens that crash landed after their ship ran out of power. Their cryo engines simply need a few ice eggs, so once those are filled, they'll fly off to a later world, leaving behind another waterlogged Jiggy. Since our lagoon business is done for now, we can revisit the Pine Grove. Dropping into the nearby pond, a Talon Torpedo is needed to destroy the boulder blocking the way. Heading through, we'll find ourselves at another Klungo fight. This time around he used the green potion, which is probably the weakest of the bunch. After each game of catch, he'll turn invisible. Just spam eggs, roll everywhere, or even just time a single shot, and he's easily defeated. On the other side, we'll find ourselves in the Wasteland. For just 315 notes, we can learn to use Clockwork Eggs, which are probably the most useful ability in the game. I would say this is a game changer, but I'm pretty sure we're still playing Banjo-Tooie. Anyway, since this move will be used a lot, let me explain how it works as we backtrack. So Clockwork Eggs are eggs that once shot will hatch into Clockwork Kazooies. These little guys have a limited lifespan and will explode once the timer is up. They take any kind of damage, step into water, or you press the X button. They can jump, but that's not all that helpful. While the game expects you to use them as fragile remote-controlled explosives, their true purpose is to collect stuff from afar, like, for example, these notes on this arch in the plateau. Back in Mayhem Temple, we can bypass needing to jump or even do the puzzle by shooting a Clockwork up to collect the Pillar Jiggy, because Clockworks can actually collect those as well. In Glitter Gulch Mine, we can avoid needing to use these Springy Step shoes by shooting a Clockwork to grab the Jiggy behind the waterfall. And they even come in handy with the generator room. In here, you're supposed to to either navigate the path, which requires at least a jump if not more, or be a sneaky peeky and backflip ground pound to climb the ladder from the start. That's just like a fun, quick strat for you. Both of those are no good because that requires jumps, so instead we can shoot a clockwork directly into it. This can be a bit difficult because it always shoots out with an arc and it explodes if it goes too far, but if you hit the Jiggy straight on, you'll collect it just fine. Also, this is a bit out of order, but we can also use a clockwork to help retrieve the rest of the balloons, allowing us to buy Pano's Jiggy jumpless, and they can even be used to collect the Smuggler's Cavern Jiggy with a careful shot from the water. Our last bit of backtracking with clockworks takes place in Witchy World. In the western zone is Humbawumba's Wigwam, which, unfortunately, you're supposed to jump to it multiple times if you want to get up there, but again, clockworks prove their clock worth. After trying it out, I realized that clockworks are actually able to activate warp pads, which is very useful. While the angle and distance seem to be too much at first, a well-placed clockwork shot right up at the warp pad's ledge can activate it despite not actually landing on it. This lets us warp to Wigma Wagma's Hum-Ham and transform into a bank van. This chunky vehicle is needed to pay the toll at a number of spots, in particular this one in the horror zone, which gives us access to Mumbo's skull. Inside is some stuff, though our main reason for being here is to bribe Mumbo into doing some magic over in the space zone. This lets us enter and pay the toll in the Dodgem Dome, and then participate in the Dodgem Challenge. This involves 3 increasingly difficult tasks involving bumper cars, but driving in a circle is way too powerful for them, netting us a wonderful jumpless Jiggy. At this point, we have a total of 28 Jiggies available to us, so we can actually unlock Pterodactyl Land, which only requires 20 Jiggies. Its entrance is in the wasteland, so it's no problem getting inside. The world itself is a bit of a problem. You see, the level is pretty similar to Click Clock Woods from the first game in that it has a large central structure that you must scale and go in and out of. Also, the ground around the mountain is very similar in that it's just like all over the place. Luckily, while it's a bit tedious, we can reach Mumbo's pad, though I never actually used Mumbo, and Humbawumba's warp pad jumpless. Also, before I forget, while navigating this ledge near the Wigwam, I found this weird little ledge glitch. It's pointless, but neat. Past that area is the entrance to the Dino family's home as well as the jail cells. This also has a path where we can take to start scaling the mountain. From here, we can flutter down and reach this Jamdar's hatch, allowing us to learn these springy step shoes. Heading back up that same path, as soon as we reach the sign pointing upwards, we'll want to perform a very careful flutter around down to here. It's pretty punishing if you miss it. This is where we're supposed to roar as a dinosaur to open the gate, but you can instead just shoot a clockwork through the gap on the side between the gate and the wall. This is known as a parallel shot, which is very useful throughout the rest of the game. With that, it's another jumpless Jiggy. Continuing on, we can precariously bird bounce our way across the steps until we gain access to the Unga Bunga's cave. This room is home to a Kazooie specific move, but first we'll want to scale the ledges up to the nearby room. This is very obnoxious, but doable, using repeated bird bounces. Once up here, we could use the split up pad so that Kazooie can run back down to the hatch to learn hatch, like the ability. It's another one of those abilities that's not used very often, but it is useful. Oh, and if you're curious, the best way to get a solo character back to the split up pad jumpless is to take an intentional death. Kazooie always has grenade eggs, which makes that quite easy, while Banjo needs some kind of damage source to fling his body into. That done, we might as well cover the Rocknut Tribe Jiggy. This one, at first, seemed quite daunting. Like, I feel like I've said that a lot, but still. Throughout the level, there are 5 members of the Rocknut Tribe who wear powerful armor that blocks attacks from the front. As a result, you're required to navigate a clockwork to their literal backside in order to take them out. Luckily, all of them are actually reachable. First off, up and to the left of the world entrance is Rocknut number 1, pretty easily dispatched. Rocknut number 2 is in that jail cell area we passed earlier. This one requires you to navigate your minion through the multiple little tunnels until you reach the target. The third Rocknut is in the train station, which has its entrance near the springy step hatch. Heading up the path, if we instead go to the right, there's a raised lake and a waterfall, as well as a small hole for a clockwork to go through and blast the 4th Rocknut. And finally, the 5th Rocknut Tribe member is in the tunnel next to the Dino Roar Cage Jiggy we collected earlier. Since this tribe member always faces Banjo, you'd normally run to one side, shoot a clockwork, have a jump across, and then detonate on his exposed posterior. Since we can bird bounce to get over here, we can stand on this step which is roughly perpendicular to the tunnel's entrance on the cage side. Shooting a clockwork off to the right gets it back onto solid ground where we can actually have enough of an angle to take him out, netting us another jumpless Jiggy. While there are lots of notes to collect, that's it for Jiggies, so backtracking, Jolly Roger's Lagoon has a Jiggy that Kazooie can collect by damage boosting up onto Tip Top's egg and hatching it. Just note that this one is interesting that if you shoot too close, the explosion will actually touch the egg, which doesn't destroy it, but it does upset Tip Top, making you have to try again. Once his little son is free, we'll be rewarded with another Jiggy. That brings our total up to 31 Jiggies, which is more than the 28 we need to unlock World 6 Grunty Industries. Unfortunately, the path to Grunty Industries involved a hole in the side of the wall in the wasteland, which is pretty high up there. If you're curious, there's a glitch I haven't covered yet where we can actually warp through certain loading zones with clockworks, but that requires the Clockwork Kazooie to be able to go through said loading zone, and this one doesn't let you do that. So, with no other options, we must use one jump with the springy Sin Shoes to get up and through the hole in the wall in the wasteland to go to the Quagmire. Much like way earlier, once there, we can unlock a silo, so we won't have to do that again. Heading into Grunty Industries, things are not very fun. I mean, realistically, it's not that challenging of a world or even that scary, but as a child, I always found it really unsettling, just wanted to share. That said, in order to get into the factory itself, we have to do some roundabout stuff, namely, wade across the mud filled with chompy boys, bird bounce onto the ladder, and then step onto the button to unlock Grunty Industries train station. Then either save or death warp out of there. Backtracking all the way to Glitter Gulch Mine, we must again get into Chuffy Jumpless, and, for the first and last time, direct him to visit a different train station. Now that we're inside Grunty Industries, we can then head out into the main room, split up, and unlock the main gates and activate the main entrance's warp pad. This also allows us to learn the Claw Clamber ability from Jam Jars. From here, we need to gain access to the higher levels, but that's difficult jumpless. Our primary way up is to somehow unlock a higher warp pad so that we can then descend down when needed. The first step in this plan requires us to travel outside and around to the backside of the factory. Here is an emergency exit door which is locked. We need to perform a fairly precise parallel clockwork shot to get our agent through the loading zone so that it can lock the door for us. Infiltration complete, we can then travel up and unlock the warp pad on floor 2 next to the wigwam. This is also where we can venture into a nearby room, split up and learn Kazooie's leg spring ability, though I'm pretty sure I never actually use it, so it's totally optional. Also on floor 2, we'll want to collect the nearby Globo, pay Humba Wumba, and transform into the angelic washing machine. Unlike the Easter egg in the first game, this washing machine is totally playable, with the ability to shoot up briefs, and of course wash dirty garments. For now, we'll use it to access the exclusive service elevator to floor 4 and damage boost onto this switch that unlocks flight pads outside the factory. Transforming back into our bear and bird, and once more going outside, we can then use the flight pads to, well, fly all the way up and unlock the warp pad at the top of the factory. That done, our path from there is a bit convoluted, but we can head down and unlock level 4's warp pad, which is quite handy. As for Jiggies, here's what we can do. As Solo Kazooie, we can fly from the top of the roof down and through this window and use 2 wing whacks and some fluttering to reach this arena. Then it's a bit of combat and clockwork for Jiggy. Another Jiggy is on this box, accessible through a skylight on the top of the roof, collected with a clockwork. Finally, we can also collect the Weldar Jiggy without having to do any of the convoluted setup needed to reach and defeat him. While exploring useful glitches in this world, I learned of a strat thanks to a video by Chronikies, a very talented glitch hunter. The glitch in question takes place in the air conditioning plant. Standing at the ladder we normally climb to gain access to the fan room, we can perform a very precise parallel clockwork shot through the gap between the ladder and the wall, which actually drops our little clock boy right onto the Jiggy. Glitches are awesome. With that, we've raised our total Jiggy count to 34, but here's the thing. We actually need a total of 36 if we want to gain access to the next world, and thus some new moves that can blow open this entire game. So let's talk about the Jinjos. Starting from 1 member and incrementing all the way up to 9 members, the family colors are white, orange, yellow, brown, green, red, blue, purple, and black. To receive any one of their Jiggies, we need to save the whole family. Like I mentioned before, Jinjo locations are static, but the color of any one Jinjo is almost always different from one file to the next. Thanks to the speedrun community, namely Dubsley and Coolboyman, who produced the dataset I'm working with, we know that there are at least 32 Jinjo patterns that you can possibly get. At this point, we have access to 6 of the 8 worlds, and there are 5 Jinjos in each world, and 5 in the Isle of Hags, so 35 of the possible 45 are currently available. Of those, to the best of my knowledge, 2 of them are not possible jumpless, meaning we have 33 Jinjo locations to work with. I wanted to be as precise as possible, so before we look at each of the spots, here's some data for you. I determined how many of each family are completable with the current limitations, and then summed up the total number of Jiggies each seed could give us. As it happens, out of 32 known seeds, 31 of the seeds will have at least 2 Jiggies. That means that while it's very, very likely you wouldn't have any problems attempting this challenge, there's a very small chance you'd come up one short, which is pretty rough. On the flip side, one single seed would provide us with 6 Jiggies. So yeah, it's very doable to get what we need, so let's actually look at those Jinjos. In Mayhem Temple, the Jinjos found on the bridge, in the small lake, hidden inside the temple, and sitting atop the Kickball Stadium entrance are all easily collected jumpless during normal gameplay. The 5th Jinjo hanging out above this jam jar hatch requires a single clockwork egg. As for Glitter Gulch Mine, all 5 are easily collected. For reference, those can be found on the minecart track, underneath a boulder atop a pile of gems, which requires a damage boost. There's also one inside the jail cell, in the toxic gas cave, and lastly atop the water tanks, which needs you to enter the world from a underwater pipe in Jolly Roger Lagoon. Witchy World is where things get difficult. The Jinjos in the Cave of Horrors, atop the tent, in Western World, and behind the Area 51 door are all easily collected. The Jinjo on top of the Dodgem Stadium is, as far as I'm aware, unreachable without jumping. Getting on top of the stadium's small domed entrance is easy enough with BK and Solo Kazooie. While a ladder move called Sack Pack has potential to get us up the pole, the large slippery slope is too much without jumping. As Banjo-Kazooie, no matter what I tried, I couldn't get onto the pole. You can't grab onto stuff during the recovery animation from an explosion, so a damage boost doesn't do anything, and also there's no jank that'll let us roll on into it. As Solo Kazooie, I even attempted to use a later move called the Glide from all over the place, but without jumping, it's just not possible to get enough height to reach the upper section. Oh, and clockworks also slip and can't be shot high enough to reach, so that's unfortunate. Next, in Jolly Roger Lagoon, it's once more smooth sailing. Get it? Anyways, the one in the sunken ship chest, the one in the big fish belly, are pretty easily collected without any extra effort. The Jinjos in Blubber Shop Rafters, Seaweed Sanctum, and the main area's alcove all need clockwork eggs. Over in Pterodactyl Land, we can easily collect the one in the alcove near the entrance, in the jail cell, in the cage near Humba's tent, which requires a parallel clockwork shot, and in the pool, which requires a Talon Torpedo to hit a button. Unfortunately, the Jinjo trapped in a cage in the Stomping Plains is impossible to reach right now because we can't actually get to the plains without reaching the top of the mountain, which requires a move learned from the world we're trying to get to. As for our last currently available world, all of them are actually collectible, fairly easily at that. There's one on floor 2 near the leg spring ability hatch, as well as another inside the water supply structure accessible from Jolly Roger's Lagoon. One is inside the smokestack, another is behind the locked door that requires you to split up, hold the button, and claw clamber up the side of the wall. And lastly, one is in the attic, accessible via breaking and entering through a window. And the last 5 Jinjos available to us right now are spread across the Isle of Hags, and are all thankfully collectible. In Spiral Mountain, we can collect one behind a Talon Torpedo Rock. In the Wooded Hollow, we can get another by just running down the tunnel to the left of the temple. The Plateau is home to a Jinjo stuck beneath a boulder that needs drilling. Clifftop has our 4th Jinjo requiring the Claw Clamber Boots. And Wasteland has our final Jinjo, which is accompanied by a tricky robotic impersonator called a Minjo. All that covered, we've collected 30 of the Jinjos, giving us at most 6 Jiggies, bringing our total up to 40. With that, we can unlock Hailfire Peaks, which is accessed quite easily from the cliff tops. This world's quirk is that it has a hot side and a cold side, with relevant obstacles and challenges on each. From the entrance, we'll want to flutter, ground pound, and burn ourselves across the lava lake to reach this structure, bait Chilly Billy into destroying it with a fireball, and boom, we can fly anywhere on the lava side. This lets us unlock the fire side upper area pad, as well as enter the ice side and then activate the upper, lower, and ice skull grotto pads. As for abilities, we can split up from the fire upper area and take Banjo over and down to this Jam Jar's hatch to learn Shack Pack. It's a real neat move in some very specific situations. One of those situations is in Grunty Industries. From the first floor, we can head down into the air-controlled plant where we do a bird bounce to climb up the ladder where we perform the Weldar skip. Heading down the air duct lets us reach the seemingly unpassable fan room. Of course, you're supposed to come through here after turning off the fan, which requires defeating Weldar, but a very difficult clockwork warp is enough to get you through the door. I couldn't pull this off myself because it's already a fairly precise trick made harder with the fan constantly pushing Banjo, as you can see in this clip by Chronicies. Depositing a grenade egg into the doorway and immediately shooting a clockwork into the door will do a clockwork warp, allowing Banjo-Kazooie into the room. I couldn't do it, but it is doable, so I'm considering it done. From there, we can use Shack Pack to retrieve the Toxic Waste Jiggy. Hailfire's final ability requires us to first bait Chilly Willy into blasting the Bigafoot on the icy side, split up, and have Kazooie claw clamber up the side of the mountain. From here, we just need to carefully wing whack and flutter down to reach the hatch that normally requires a bunch of cursed platforming. This rewards us with the glide ability, which lets Kazooie hold a trigger button to glide, well, in the air. It's basically falling with style. Like I mentioned before, this opens up a number of jiggies. First off, we can backtrack to Witchy World and take Solo Kazooie into the Star Spinner area. You're supposed to climb the stars using jumps, but we can actually use a wing whack out of the crater to get airborne and then flutter and glide over so that we can get hit by an enemy and recoil onto the first star. It sounds very simple, but it took me like 20 minutes to get up there just once, though as soon as we're up there, we can climb the rest of the stars with no issue. At the top, to collect the Jiggy, we can aim and shoot a clockwork so that it hits it head on, which is tough, but doable. Even bigger than that though, in Pterodactyl Land, inside the mountain's cavern, we can split up and glide over to the previously inaccessible flight pad. I tried for way too long to get up here as Banjo-Kazooie using a damage boost, but I don't think that's possible. After flying to the top of the cavern, we'll find our path out gated. Normally this is where you enter the cavern, so the button is on the other side. Thankfully, a parallel clockwork shot is more than enough to breach it. Unfortunately, a clockwork can't press the button, but it can travel out, around to the stairs, down, and over to unlock the warp pad before the timer is up. Doing this lets us reach the titular Terry, beat him for a Jiggy, and blow open a hole in his nest for a second Jiggy. From the mountaintop warp pad, we can then reach the same area from before, but with both bear and bird. With fairly precise movement, we can run off the ledge, flutter down to land on this pillar. This lets us summon Champa, a dino who has a bit of a stomachache. To fix this, he eats us, and we participate in a minigame to clear up his gut. As a reward, we get another Jiggy. From the mountaintop, we can also take Kazooie across the treacherous pathway and through the Fire Nest Cave. We need to shoot ice eggs to extinguish the fire, and some very careful movement will actually get us across into the aforementioned Stomping Plains. With its warp pad, we can reunite and bring both Banjo-Kazooie here. The Great Faceless Stompodon guards these plains, and one step from it reduces us to 1 health. As such, we have to Wonder Wing our way across in order to activate the button and retrieve its Jiggy. Just checking in, we're now up to 46 Jiggies. That's already more than enough to unlock the final world, but first let's go ahead and grab some Hailfire Jiggies. First off, Hailfire's Coliseum has a path into the Mayhem Kickball Stadium in Mayhem Temple, along with a handy warp pad. After transforming back into the Stony, we can teleport into the stadium and painstakingly shoulder bash into the corner of the wall and the steps in order to scale them jumpless. This took way too long to get done, but once it's done, we can go through a set of minigames for a Jiggy. Back in Hailfire, the Jiggy inside the volcano is fairly easy. We just gotta perform some careful flutters and ground pounds to navigate the various platforms. Also near the top of the fire side, we'll want to use Solo Banjo's Shack Pack ability to delve into the hot water to retrieve the helpless fish. Unfortunately for the fish, we'll be taking him over to the icy side and delivering him straight to the mouth of Boggy the Polar Bear for another Jiggy. By the way, if you're curious, to get to this igloo, we need to abuse Chilly Willy's Frostbolt attacks to scale the fearsome ledges. Also, each of those attacks shakes the screen, which actually allows for a really cool trick. If we position Banjo against the right wall of the igloo's entrance, aim directly at the seam, and wait for the perfect moment, We can fire a clockwork egg right through the gap that appears during the screen shake. This allows us to collect the icy side train station Jiggy, not only jumpless, but without needing to do any of the usual required shenanigans. Next, we should collect the Globo, deliver to Humbawamba, and transform into a snowball. In this form, we can teleport over to the upper fire side, roll to the left, and head back into the icy side. Assuming we have full health and thus are hefty enough to press the button, the oil drill can be turned on. After transforming back, Solo Banjo can use the Shack Pack to venture into the pipe and collect another Jiggy. Also on the icy side, I should mention that on our first visit we'll see a fun cutscene where the aliens from earlier show up just to have the father fall out of the ship. He, dies. After reviving him with Mumbo's magic, he'll ask us to find his 3 children. The dead alien named Alphet near Humba's tent needs to be build drilled free, as does Betet, but you'll need to rely on getting airborne from Chilly Willy's frost attack. The third, Gamet, is above the icy split-up pad. You just need to take Solo Kazooie up the side of the mountain and carefully glide and flutter down to land directly onto the small alien and hatch her? Okay, the last thing we'll need to do is have Mumbo come over and revive Alphet, which rewards us with another Jiggy. The other Mumbo pad near the igloo can be reached with more of Chilly Willy's frostbolts. Once up here, Mumbo can revive the frozen Saberman. As Banjo and Kazooie, we can then use fire eggs to warm him up in preparation for a later visit. For now, we have a total of 52 Jiggies, which is way more than enough to unlock Cloud Cuckoo Land, the final world of the game. In this one, navigating between individual islands is done with the flower, cannons, and jelly landing pads. It's weird, but no jumps required. Also, there are multiple flight pads scattered around. As for warp pads, the only other one is in the central cavern. This world also has one new ability. You're expected to do some overly complicated stuff to reach it, but Banjo can just enter the cavern from the front, drop down to reach jam jars with Shack Pack. The move you learn is none other than Sack Pack. These names are very easy to mix up. Sack Pack allows Banjo to wear his backpack like a potato sack, which has the added benefit of making him automatically bounce all over the place while moving. If you're curious, no, those are not counted as jumps. Rather than go into the Jiggies in this world, let's first backtrack to Pterodactyl Land. Up inside the mountain is a small cave accessible from the above ground lake, where we'll find another Jamdar's hatch, which I thought previously inaccessible. The trick I found is to actually bait out the enemy in this corner and dismount so that you get damage boosted up. Once up here, we can learn Taxi Pack, which lets Banjo scoop stuff up and take them places. While we can get some Jiggies with this new ability in Grunty Industries, it's actually the key to unlocking another move. Outside the factory, we can smack and transport a battery to unlock the Toxic Waste Plant. I originally thought this would require us to reach the battery slot platform, which seemed nigh impossible as Solo Banjo, but we could just toss it in. I tried to theorycraft away from up there for hours, and you could just toss it in. It wasn't my proudest moment. Using the claw clamber boots, we can get up and over to access the newly opened hatch. Once inside, we can split up and Banjo can learn Snooze Pack. Now it's time for backtracking, but only after we sack Pack across the waist and collect a Jiggy. With the power of sleep, Banjo can brave the trash compactor, rewarding us with another Jiggy, and in Pterodactyl Land, it also lets Banjo very slowly make his way across the stomping plains to activate the Banjo button. After dying and regrouping, going back across again lets us transition into Hellfire Peaks for another Jiggy. Taxi Pack also lets Banjo carry Saberman to his tent on the fireside for a Jiggy, and that done, his Sack Pack is key to another one, but first a bit of context. You're supposed to take Banjo up the chain inside the Coliseum and out onto the balcony to initiate a bit of button musical chairs with Kazooie. This is impossible because we can only dismount this chain by jumping, and that's a no-go. I did consider a damage boost using the fireball shooting gargoyle from nearby, but Banjo can't get out of the recoil animation soon enough to grab onto the ledge. Kazooie can reach her buttons fine, but Banjo's seemed out of reach. Thankfully, there's a glitch for that. As it turns out, if you use the Sack Pack right after taking damage that puts you in this animation, like touching lava, you'll activate a sort of low gravity Sack Pack where his animation is slower and he bounces way higher than normal. Combined with the dismount for added hang time, Banjo can quite easily reach this nearby alcove. From there he can navigate over to the other alcove and then carefully bait out a blast from Chili Billy, which allows you to initiate the glitch again. And then, I had to try this a few times, we can bounce out to the right, dismount, and use the pack whack to get just far enough to land on the balcony. Yeah, it looks painful, but it's very much worth it because we can easily activate the other buttons for yet another jumpless Jiggy. From there, it's finally time to take out Chili Billy and Chili Willy, who ended up being a couple of our biggest allies in this world. On the fire side, we can fly up to access the stairs to the peak. As for the ladder, a careful bird bounce will be enough. The icy side arena is reached in much the same way, just needing the claw and clamber boots that we've shown off previously. These battles can seem daunting as you'd usually fire eggs out of the cannons and jump over their spicy tongue attacks. Instead, you could just use Wonder Wing to avoid the damage and either bird bounce or carefully damage boost across any of the gaps between the platforms. With those strats in mind, both battles are pretty easy, which is another Jiggy for us. Heading back to Witchy World for the last time, we finally have all the tools needed to return Boggy's mischievous children back to their mother. Soggy can be bribed into heading back by giving her fries, which is easy enough. We just need to press the button to activate Salty Joe's shop. Moggy needs to be smacked before he'll head back. And when it comes to Groggy, he's stuck near Mumbo's skull, but refuses to go back until he's given one final burger. To activate the burger shop, Solo Kazooie will need to get onto the big top tent, which requires a damage boost and careful movement, and then glide all the way over to the button. After being fed a burger, Groggy will allow Banjo to taxi him back to his mother, at which point we'll get a Jiggy. And then over in Western World, we can also do some stuff with the inflatable tent. Solo Banjo has no problem using his sack pack to bounce his way up and into the air pump room. Kazooie previously seemed like a lost cause. She's great at controlling descents, but gaining height without flying is a no-go. Luckily, she can just barely get in with the help of wing wax and gliding. After the tent is reinflated, the duo's flying challenge is an easy Jiggy. Kazooie's solo ring challenge is much harder. You're expected to grab the running shoes and jump through the various rings. Of course, we're not gonna do that. The red rings worth 1 point are easily enough run through, as their lower edge is almost flush to the floor. The smaller, higher up green rings worth 2 points can't be run through, but thanks to the game's weird collision, you're able to rub against them and sometimes get the points. And the blue rings are totally out of reach. Also, I'm realizing I called this thing a tent twice, even though it's a castle. That's just future me being confused at past me. Okay, anyways, that's a Jiggy, awesome. Back up in the clouds, let's look at what's available to us. So first off, down and to the left of the cavern's main entrance is George Ice Cube. Much like his wife, his only fate is suffering, because he asks us to push him off the edge only for him to fall and melt in the pool of boiling water in Hellfire Peaks. Down here, Banjo needs to use Shack Pack to push the button, which drains the now just warm water into Jolly Roger's pool. As for that world itself, we can blow open and enter the pipe with a bird bounce, which is where we collected that Grunty Industries Jinjo I mentioned earlier, as well as press a button that turns off the flow of toxic waste. Finally, for our efforts in 4 different worlds, we get a Jiggy. Another water-related task in Cloud Cuckoo Land requires us to break a Talon Torpedo boulder in this reservoir, which blesses some rains down in Pterodactyl Land. Dippy gets to drink, and we get a Jiggy. I should also mention that this world has 2 Mumbo skulls. It's a random chance on where it'll be, but in one of them we'll find an aggressive Mumbo. Beating him up reveals that he's actually just Minji Jongo, a robo-imposter. It's a simple battle, and thus a simple Jiggy. Inside the main cavern, there is a large metal safe that requires a code to be inputted. You're expected to enter this code by pressing buttons placed around the world, but a easy parallel clockwork shot that makes the lockpicking lawyer proud skips that entirely for another Jiggy. There is another puzzle piece inside of the Red Jelly Castle which requires Solo Banjo's Shack Pack to enter, and then to actually reach the Jiggy, the Sack Pack dismount is just enough height. Oh, and another Jiggy can be won using Kazooie in a minigame inside the trash can. Then, one of the islands accessible via flowers or flying contains Humbawumba's Wiggity Waggity tent. By paying a Globo, we can transform into a familiar form, Bee. His moveset is much the same as in the first game, able to take flight after becoming airborne, which is doable by walking off a ledge. His new fancy ability though is to aim and shoot stingers while mid-air. This is used to defeat the various eyeball planets throughout the world, which gives us a Jiggy, and then it's also used to open the path into the Zubba's nest high up in the mountain. And here is a minigame where they once again offered to die for the sake of a bit of shooting practice. Of course, the reward is a Jiggy. Back at the Wigwam, outside is the final boss of this world, Canary Mary. Now, don't get me wrong, this doesn't require jump at all. That said, her rematch race is stupidly difficult. Personally, I don't think I've ever beaten it with just my feeble human hands alone. There's loads of tricks that you can use. Personally, if I had the option, I would have just used a turbo controller, but since I didn't have one of those handy, I opted for a different kind of tool-assisted run. While playing the game on the Xbox 360, I had used a pen that I rubbed quickly over the X button, but my Xbox One controller seemed to be a bit too stubborn for that, so I opted for something a bit different. I used the handle of my Pro Switch controller. Yeah, sure, I may have risked scratching two of my favorite controllers, but something about the collaboration between Nintendo and Microsoft for a Jiggy just sort of makes sense. As we approach the end of our journey, let's quickly look at the Jinjos available to us in the final two worlds, all of which are actually collectible jump lists. Okay, so before we can even talk about the Hailfire and Cloud Cuckoo Land Jinjos, I need to go back and talk about the Stomping Plains one. You might notice I'm a little flustered because I'm actually in the middle of editing a video, rushing to get it out, even though it had to be delayed because stuff like this. So while recording the footage of the demonstration of how you're normally supposed to do this Jinjo, you run and jump between the various footprints as Kazooie to get to the other side to press the button to open the gate. Yes, there is a glitch in the N64 version where you can scoop it out or use a beak egg barge glitch, but that doesn't work on the Xbox version, so I thought it's impossible. But before that, I was like, okay, I need to make sure to record some footage with the grenade eggs damage boosting. But here's the thing, that works. That actually does it. You can get all the way across and get the Jinjo, which means that opens up that much more. So I have to run the numbers again and change some stuff later on for how many Jiggies we get, but yay, progress. Okay, back to your regularly scheduled Jinjo recap. In Hailfire, the Jinjos in the hot pool that had the fish, Mildred Ice Cube, and the Icicle Grotto are all simple enough. The one in the small cave with the wind requires a full-size snowball to collect or a well-placed clockwork. As for the one behind the boiling hot waterfall, we can't get in there using the Wonder Wing, which is what you're supposed to do, but it turns out we could just damage boost up in there. Nice. In Cloud Cuckoo Land, the Jinjo in the Central Cavern, Humba Rafters, Stinky Cheese, and Trash Can are all accessible with clockworks. Oh, and the one inside the Minji Jongo skull can be grabbed like normal. Now, before we head off to the end of the game, let's first do a bit of a recap of all the Jiggies I had to leave behind. So in World 1 Mayhem Temple, 3 of the Jiggies are just out of reach. Slumber's Treasure, located atop Cheeto's Temple in the Jade Snake Grove, normally requires you to jump twice to reach the platform and sneak across the bramble to grab it without waking up the snake. A clockwork is the go-to tool for this, but that has a few issues. Its range is limited, and it will alert the snake if it touches the floor, and it'll explode if it hits any part of Slumber. I tried for quite a while, but I couldn't quite get it to work. Like most of the Jiggies on this final list, I think there's definitely potential. The Jiggy on the other side of the prison compound's stretch of quicksand would normally require about 4 jumps to reach the wading boots which are required to get across. I tried and tried to get a clockwork across, but it just doesn't reach. We can't split up anywhere in this world, and a solo Banjo or Kazooie can't leave the other in a world. You can't actually have Sack Pack or Glide. I mean, there is a glitch where we can mess with where the Dragunda spits you out, but I don't think that is enough to get there either. The last Mayhem Temple Jiggy is the Targazan Sacred Relic, which is found in the Unga Bunga Cave in Pterodactyl Land. The thing is, here you're supposed to sneak across, jump up, grab the relic, and just walk it back. It's a surprisingly easy Jiggy, and it's supposed to be done very early in the game. So this was like my goal, this entire challenge. It's like, I really want this Jiggy, but it always seemed just out of reach. But while getting the footage for this bit, I cracked the case. So this is not a possible Jiggy, it's actually quite possible. Okay, so we'll want to split up outside of the cave, like somewhere like the jail cell, and walk Banjo all the way up. Using the fire to activate the low gravity sack pack, we can get over onto this fire and damage boost so that we land in front of the relic. Now when we pull out our sack pack, we'll again have the low gravity glitch, and we want to very, very carefully dismount while just nudging forward barely so that Banjo lands right up there on the ledge without touching the relic. As soon as you touch the relic, you're locked into holding it, but if you go into your sack pack, then collect it, and then go all the way around and then die, it's not removed from you because it hasn't been pulled out yet. So if we group back up as Banjo and Kazooie and we go and die when we respawn, which we respawn in the last place we entered the world, which was in the Unga Bunga Cave, we have the relic. I'm just so excited. I did not expect to get this Jiggy, but it worked. And that's how it's done. Once we have the relic, we can freely just walk back, turn it in, and collect the Jiggy, no problem, making it 73. Look at that. I did not expect that. In Witchy World, there's again 3 Jiggies I wasn't able to get. One is atop the Dive of Death platform in the Spooky Zone, as Banjo-Kazooie, our only barrier, is actually getting onto the ladder. Like I mentioned before, Banjo can't grab onto stuff during the recoil animation for an explosion, so grenade eggs don't help, and there's no janky collision like the train ladder and cactus pole, so that's also out. As for Solo Banjo, he can quite easily get up onto the ladder using his sack pack, but the actual Jiggy seems to be a bit too high. If we could activate the lower gravity sack pack glitch up here, it might be possible, but I just don't think it's currently doable jumpless. Nearby, this spiral slide near Mumbo's skull is also just out of reach. We can get Banjo-Kazooie and Solo Kazooie up there quite easily, but we would have to use a jump using the spring pad to reach the Jiggy itself. The surrounding standable area isn't far enough out to permit a clockwork to hit the Jiggy, let alone land on top of the platform. And the last Jiggy in this world is the Saucer of Peril. The only thing stopping us from getting its jumpless is the ledge in the fuel storage room. We need to get Detonator Banjo up there to blow open the rubble, but his little hops aren't enough to get there. Also, attempting the detonator levitation glitch would require a jump, so that doesn't help either. So close yet so far. The next 3 troublesome Jiggies are in Pterodactyl Land, all of them requiring a lot of steps. We can warm and feed almost all of the Oogle Boogle tribe, but just almost. Getting into the cave is easy enough. You can either use a clockwork warp, which I showed off earlier, or do it as intended as large T-Rex because he can get there jumpless. Lighting 2 of the fires is easy enough, as is delivering food to them from Witch World. The issue arises when trying to reach the 3rd. You're supposed to use the spring pad to jump up to the grabbable ledge. While it might be possible to light the fire from afar using some weird stuff, without a method to get Banjo up there, it's a no-go. This cave is also where another Jiggy has issues for much the same reason. Hatching and returning Terry's eggs is quite doable for 3 of the 4, assuming you do the one inside the central cavern last. The egg in this cave is just out of reach, and our only means of getting that high is another shock spring pad. And then the last Jiggy from this world would come from helping Scrotty with her kids. The sick dino should also be jumpless, as we can unlock the Pterodactyl Land train station with Solo Kazooie, and it's a small jaunt over there from the cave. The only thing stopping us from getting this Jiggy is actually in Witchy World. There, we need to unlock the train station by stepping on the button. A clockwork doesn't work, and we're expected to use the grabbable ledge in at least 1 jump. I truly believe that this is possible using Solo Kazooie and a series of glide flutters against the available slope walls, which would give you enough height. It's just so close, it's not quite there. If it is possible reliably, then the Jiggy would be totally jumpless. As for Grunny Industries, almost half of the Jiggies go uncollected. First off, we can wash almost all of the rabbit workers' clothes with the washing machine, but at the very least, we would need at least 1 jump outdoors to get up onto the platform. As for the Pack of the Twinklies Jiggy, I was not able to find a way for Solo Banjo carrying a battery to reach the boiler plant room, which is where we need to deposit said battery to access the minigame. I even tried utilizing the low gravity sack pack, but it wasn't enough. The last 2 Jiggies, Blast the Barrels and Destroy the Clinkers, are gated behind the Crushers on level 4. Getting Mumbo up onto the pad to disable the Crushers would require many jumps, so that's not going to happen. One method that could work would be to get Solo Kazooie up onto the platform via the hatch in the attic, but that requires at least 3 jumps to drill the bolts. If we could get Kazooie up there, she can flutter into the Crusher, which causes a glitch that disables it without needing Mumbo. From there, it'd be way easier, but for now, that's not happening. The only uncollected Jiggy in Hailfire Peaks is the Coliseum Kickball Tournament, because little Stony Banjo can't reach the tunnel from Mayhem Temple without needing at least one jump. Lastly, Cloud Cuckoo Land has 3 Jiggies that I thought were impossible. 2 of them pretty much still are, but 1 isn't. The original roadblock I was facing was that Mumbo had no way to jump up the cavern to reach the stretch of land with the Mumbo pad. Well, as it happens, he could just walk off the ledge from the red skull and slide on down. Like I mentioned before, Mumbo can be in either the blue or red skull based on the playthrough, like randomly, but you can reach the red skull from the blue one, so that's not a problem. With his rain dance, you can fly over, hit the button, and run across the rainbow to access the pot of gold. Once inside, just ignore my infinite eggs, you must deposit a single egg of normal, fire, ice, and grenade into their corresponding receptacles, and then leave and do that whole thing again just so we can get back onto the platform. The ensuing minigame is very easy, giving us our 74th Jiggy. I won't go into the other 2 Jiggies in depth because the ones found in the Stinky Cheese and from Mr. Fitz challenges both have the exact same issue. When it comes time for Solo Banjo to climb the beanstalk that Mumbo grew, he can't dismount them without jumping. Literally no button other than jump will dismount him. He's so close, yet so far. All that said, we have 74 Jiggies, all of the moves, and we've only used a total of 4 jumps thus far. Not bad, all things considered. Now, I think we're ready to finish this thing once and for all. There are 2 final Jiggy Wiggy challenges, one at 55 Jiggies for the Cauldron Keep, and the final at 70 Jiggies for the final boss itself. Once those are successfully completed, we're off to the Quagmire. We'll want to damage boost up onto the pipe, run and grab the Claw Clamber boots, and then run all the way back and up the wall. Once through, we're faced with the keep itself, which is surrounded by a moat of purple acid. Banjo and Kazooie can cross, no problem, but Kazooie solo isn't so lucky. Much like Mayhem Temple's quicksand or the liquid in the Chilly Willy and Billy fights, touching this acid removes any control you have, spinning you back where you started. That means that we need to get across without taking any damage, which is extremely difficult without jumping. Luckily though, it's difficult, but not impossible. So running along the outer path on the side of the keep, we'll find a small ramp. It's very hard to do reliably, but if we start a run, wing whack over the acid, and immediately flutter, Kazooie can just barely pass across the acid and reach solid ground on the other side. With that, she can go step onto her own button to drop the drawbridge, reconnecting with Banjo, and the duo can then disable the electric gate. Heading inside, we're faced with the 3rd and final encounter against poor Klungo. On my file, he used his blue potion for this one, which lets him create holograms in an attempt to confuse you. While annoying, this fight is just as simple as the previous, and we're able to move on to the government-mandated game show.
A slam dunk, final answer. Oh.
Name a yellow fruit.
Orange.
This one, called the Tower of Tragedy, has Banjo facing off against Mingella and Blobelda in 3 rounds of rapid-fire questions. While it's definitely fun, this is much easier than in the first game, as there are no minigame challenges mixed in to make things difficult. With a bit of know-how and some careful buzzing, we can emerge victorious, which Gruntilda isn't happy about at all. She retreats to the top of the tower, where our final fight will take place. Before entering said fight, I should mention that Dingpot the Cauldron is here, ready to help the duo once more by refilling their eggs and health. Unfortunately, we would have to jump to get into him, so the only way to legitimately refuel between attempts is to warp pad out and head all the way back down, which is not fun. Taking an elevator up, Banjo and Kazooie find themselves facing off against Gruntilda in the Hag 1, which is the vehicle that we've been on the trail of since the start of the game. Grunty, and thus the Hag 1, have a total of 100 health. At every 10 health increments, she'll change things up. The battle begins with her turning on 2 of the Hag 1's lasers and doing some donuts. Normally, you would have to jump over the lasers, but you can actually just run up and hug the side of the vehicle to turn with it, avoiding any need for jumping. Their Wonder Wing could work, but it's too slow to pull out and has limited charge. Every so often, Gruntilda will pop out and will have 5 seconds to answer a trivia question. On a right answer, she'll use a slower attack, but on a wrong answer, she'll use the faster one, so we definitely want to answer correctly. At 90 health, she'll turn on all 4 lasers, which is definitely more difficult to avoid, but still very doable. At 80 health, she decides to turn off the lasers and instead uses some mortar cannons. These shells explode into 4 projectiles, which, while dangerous, can be avoided with some careful movement. After reaching 70 health, she'll bring out a second mortar cannon, which leaves a bit less room for mistakes. As soon as the Hag 1 reaches 60 health, things get difficult, and not because of her attacks. After trying to drill into our very squishy protagonists, the Hag 1 will briefly shut down. You're expected to shoot a clockwork into its exhaust pipe and blow up the batteries found within. This square opening is very difficult to work with, but with very careful aiming, you can land a shot inside of the entrance rather than outside, which would cost us a jump. Inside the battery's housing, there are 2 wires blocking the path. The first one can be walked over thanks to its janky collision. The other isn't as forgiving. The explosion alone won't reach, so we're forced to expend 1 jump to destroy the first battery and a second jump to destroy the other battery. After destroying both of them, the Hag 1 will be down to 40 health, and Gruntilda will resort to tossing spells and enemies at us. She's feeling the pressure, so at 30 health, she'll release a toxic gas which will continually deplete your air meter. It's a race against the clock, but with some good old root and toot and point and shooting, we can get her down to a single health. We have her on the ropes, but Gruntilda Winky Bunyan, Witch Extraordinaire, isn't going to go out that easily. She summons one final ultimate spell, to which we respond with a single egg to the face. After all of this, she is the source of her own destruction, and her ultimate spell ultimately spells her own doom, blowing up the Hag 1. This marks her defeat, and our victory over Banjo-Tooie as a whole. So, finally, as the credits play, I can answer the question, how many jumps does it take to beat Banjo-Tooie? Well, it's just 6. Talk about an improvement from the first game. Like I mentioned at the start, I took on this challenge and I saw it to the end without looking at anyone else's jumpless attempts, so I was not expecting it to be this low. If you look back, our jumps were used twice for overworld progression, twice for access to critical moves, and twice in the final battle. While there is always room for improvement, I am quite happy with how this turned out. Hopefully, if you watched all the way to the end, I hope you feel the same. Now, before moving on from Banjo-Tooie, I would like to share some information that has since come to my attention that seriously blows open this challenge and my understanding of the game as a whole. First, we'll just start with some helpful comments. As Dexter suggested, it is possible to collect the Clifftop Jinjo with a clockwork egg. I thought this was out of reach, but in this short video by Chronikies, you can see the positioning needed. Using this as a guide, I got this on sorta my first attempt. Nice. Lootable shared the fact that you can actually collect the Jinjo in the Jade Snake Grove area of Mayhem Temple by simply kicking with the Golden Goliath. I never thought to try this, and I never realized just how high his foot goes, but it reaches super easily. There's a little correction by Rondo of Blood X, where it turns out you could just blow open the guest room door in Jolly Roger's Lagoon instead of paying 2 doubloons. It doesn't change the route, but it's good to know. A more important correction was provided by Scamule. Turns out Klongo's potions are random, but only in the N64 version. In the Xbox 360 version, which is what I played for the video, they always follow a set pattern. He grows in the Spire Mountain fight, he goes invisible in Pine Grove, and he multiplies in Cauldron Keep. Also, I think Chris is right. I called Bully and Bill and Delberta friends, but I guess they're actually partners. Anyways, Baylor was one of a few commenters who mentioned YouTube creator Gingivitis and their video titled "Can You Beat Banjo-Tooie Without Jumping?" The video was uploaded in May of 2019, a full year before my video. That said, my video was created without ever knowing of or seeing Gingivitis' video, but still, we came to a lot of similar conclusions using different methods and presentations. I think that Gingivitis' video is worth a watch, so check it out using the card on screen or link in the description after finishing up this one. Also, after my video was uploaded, I was reached out to by N64 video game speedrunner Falcon. Falcon brought to my attention a few things, like the fact that Banjo can actually grab onto climbable surfaces, like ladders and ropes, if you take damage, but in Talon Trot. It's so simple, and I never tried it, but it works. This means that you can get up onto the Dodgem Dome in Witchy World for the Jinjo that has been plaguing my nightmares ever since I released that video. Also, you can actually enter first person and shoot eggs while in Talontron, which is another little detail that is just totally new to me. Also, thanks to a few clips shared by Falcon and my subsequent attempts at recreating them, I learned that you can actually just enter the first person shooting mode and you won't slip down slopes. So this means that you can actually position yourself on the slide and Clockwork Kazooie yourself the Jiggy at the top of Witchy World's Inferno tower thing, as well as get Slumber's Jiggy, both of which I previously thought were totally out of reach. Already my understanding of what's possible in this game has been expanded, but then Falcon reminded me of a video uploaded by Ring Rush in May of 2022. In it, Ring Rush details how one could collect nearly every single collectible without ever jumping, or using fly pads, or using Kazooie's mid-air flutters. It's a wild video that I implore you to watch for yourself. That said, I would like to highlight a few spots in the video so that we can re-answer the question of how many jumps does it take to beat Banjo-Tooie. First, I'll give a quick refresher on the jumps I thought were necessary. There was one jump to reach the platform with the doorway leading to the plateau, another was used to get to the jam jar silo for the bill drill ability, a third jump was used to reach the Talon Torpedo Silo, an ability I thought was required to progress the game, but I don't think that's even true. The fourth jump was used to reach the Quagmire from the Wasteland, and the fifth and sixth jumps were used in the final battle to navigate a Clockwork Kazooie over the wire so that we could explode the Hag-1's batteries. Now for removing those jumps, first, a bit of tech is needed called a bit clip. The first bit clip found in a Banjo game was actually accidental, encountered by the previously mentioned Falcon while idling in Witchy World's western zone. The 8-bit beast analyzed this clip and figured out the science behind it, so it was named a bit clip. 8-bit beast, it makes sense. That said, what is a bit clip? The terrain in Banjo-Kazooie and Tooie are made up of triangles. If you get Banjo to very specific points on the seam of some of these triangles, the game's algorithm will fail to detect Banjo as being above any of the adjacent triangles due to a rounding error. That means that these seams are essentially gaps in the collision that you can just fall through. Apparently, floor gaps are 0.00001 units wide. And Banjo moves 700 units per second in Talon Trot, so the level of precision needed means that reliable setups are required if you ever want to do this in an actual run with actual human hands. And the 8-bit beast and Ring Rush have both put together some viable setups, the videos of which you can find in the description. Now that you know what a bit clip is, it makes a bit more sense how Ring Rush was able to initiate a ground pound while standing on seemingly flat ground. It's because he actually technically was about to fall. Interrupting that ground pound with the skill stop honeycomb prevents Banjo from slamming back down, so he just instead gets sort of yoked up right where he needs to go. It's like magic, but with math. The bill drill ability can be reached jumpless by grabbing the speedy shoes and activating the timed gate button in Glitter Gulch Mine. The extra speed lets Banjo fall, peck, and ground pound to this ledge, and then the gate closing cutscene interrupts a ground pound, resulting in the same upwards boost shown previously, letting you get the ability. Talon Torpedo is reached using a bit clip and a clockwork explosion, but it's more complex than that, and you're better off checking out Ring Rush's video for an explanation. As for reaching the Quagmire, I don't actually know if there is a way to scale the wall without the spring shoes. Thankfully, there is another way into Grunty Industries, namely the pipe spewing toxic waste in Jolly Roger's Lagoon that leads to the room aptly named the Toxic Waste Room. Here you can actually use a bit clip to fall through the floor and then immediately move and peck to get Banjo to enter the water. I recreated this myself using BizHawk and the game set position code included in the Banjo-Tooie A button challenge master document, which meant I was right there where I needed to be, no setup required, and even then I had to save states and lower the game speed to at least half because I could have been doing it wrong, but the window for having to peck before you're too low and then actually getting Banjo to start swimming down is really annoying and difficult, but it is possible. That's the important part. It is possible. And then Banjo can swim towards the Grunty Industry side with the spicy water, which will throw him up onto the appropriate ledge. Then you just climb up the ladder using a bit of Talon Trot recoil, unlock the front gate, and then head out through the main entrance and touch the fast travel silo, and boom! Now you have access to Grunty Industries without jumping. As for the battery compartment in the final fight, Ring Rush's video doesn't offer any salvation. He does show how you can actually clockwork warp Banjo into that room, who can then grenade egg the battery, but then you're stuck. Exiting the room causes the final battle to reset. Either way, using the magic of math and science, it's possible to beat Banjo-Tooie in just 2 jumps. Crazy.
Once upon a time, there lived a heroic bear named Banjo, a rather rude bird named Kazooie, and an absolute witch called Gruntilda. When Banjo's sister was kidnapped, the bear and bird rescued her while jumping as few times as possible, overcoming many ledges and tedious edits to send Gruntilda directly into the Shadow Realm. But she was nothing if not persistent, and as was contractually obligated, the old hag soon rose from her grave for round 2. Our weak-legged heroes once again rose to the challenge, and this second showdown ended with even less jumps than the first. A year has passed and peace reigns in Spiral Mountain. So what became of the bear, the bird, and the witch?
This is not okay, but here we are. In the original 2 videos, we achieved the minimal jump goal by limiting normal jumps, backflips, shock spring pads, and so on. Flight was allowed because it was fairly situational and helped make things more interesting. While we still cannot jump, this time the rules are a bit different because it's not a platformer, it's a vehicle game. So the restrictions are mostly on vehicle parts. Springs and the much less useful but otherwise similar boot in a box can help give a vehicle a standard jump, so those are out. Propellers, wings, jets, and balloons allow for propulsion and flight, which is way too overpowered in this game, so those are also out. I didn't realize till later, but the Suck and Blow gadget can be used to create a very powerful flying vehicle, so using it to push and pull objects is fine, but propulsion is not allowed. The ejector seat and self-destruct gadgets are both pretty situational, so I considered allowing them, but in the end, I never found myself forced to use them, so consider them banned as well. All that said, our adventure begins in Showdown Town, where a number of doors open into various game worlds, all crafted by the Lord of Games, or Log, himself. The whole goal of the game is to gather at least 75 Jiggies from those worlds to unlock the door back to Spiral Mountain for a final showdown against Gruntilda. So scattered throughout Showdown Town are a number of Mumbo crates which hold new vehicle parts that we can use in the garage to create the vehicles we'll be using in said missions and challenges. Since we want to eventually get a bunch of crates, exploration is important, so I set off and unlocked all the fast travel panels to make sure they were reachable. Spoiler, they are, especially if you use a glitch called trolley hovering, which is basically lifting, but with style. In theory, it's simple. You place an object like a Mumbo crate in the trolley's tray, get onto the object, and use Kazooie's magical wrench to lift the trolley up. Due to troll physics, you begin to go soaring through the air, but the collision in this game is confusing at best, so you almost always fall down immediately. Also, since we don't want to jump, getting onto the object that's on the cart in the first place requires careful use of nearby terrain, so it's extremely limited, and as such, I rarely used it throughout the challenge run. Either way, I was able to get up here to Boggy's Gym by the docks. If you don't know, the gym lets us spend musical notes to increase Banjo's running speed, health gauge, and wrench lifting strength. It's not a huge improvement, but every little bit helps. Speaking of notes, you'll find many scattered throughout the town and many more inside each of the worlds. They're very useful for buying parts from Humbawamba and not much else, at least for this challenge. The town has some extra activities outside of just going into the worlds, like Klungo's Arcade, but it's a mini game that requires jumps, so that's a hard pass. There are collectible crates all over, but I ended up only turning in 3 of them, which unlocked a few pieces for our vehicle crafting collection. Of those, only the gun and the high grip wheels are helpful. With the introductions out of the way, let's head into the first world, Nutty Acres. Wow, this cutscene's going along wild, isn't it? Man, those characters do look cool though. Nutty Acres, what a name. So... still going, isn't it? Man. How much longer do we have? Oh boy, are we done yet? I feel like it's wrapping up, but I can't tell. Is it done? Are we done here? Oh, okay, cool. So, this first act has just a single introductory mission, which is to reach Mumbo at the center of the island within the time limit. As with every mission, there are 3 possible outcomes. Depending on the time or score, we can get notes, notes and a Jiggy, or notes, a Jiggy, and a TT trophy. That last one is a collectible that can be turned in 4 at a time for a Jiggy, so we want to ace as many missions as possible. Back in town, we learn that Jiggies we earn can be dispensed from the world's Jiggo-Vend, which we can then deliver to the giant receptacle in the town square. Our first Jiggy unlocks Nutty Acres Act 2, as well as adding more parts to Humba's shop. To start, I bought the medium engine and some spikes. Next, I revisited the water below Klungo's Arcade because I came through here before, but the Jiggy tamper switch wasn't functioning. But now that it is, I activated it for a one-time bonus Jiggy, raising our count to 2, which dispensed the next world's orb, which I then delivered to the downtown area. The game expects you to jump up some short steps to drop a little bridge for easy access, but I don't want to do that. After fumbling for a bit, I decided to use one of the grass standees to hover up onto the platform. This is very doable without having to hover, but that's what I decided to do. Either way, I unlocked Logbox and then went back into Nutty Acres Act 2. This one has 3 missions, and I started with Mumbo's at the town. He wants us to deliver a soon-to-explode bomb. Getting there requires simple driving, but we're forced to use a large, bulky vehicle. I immediately activated the mobile garage feature, which lets me alter the vehicle on the fly. This feature is a godsend on missions like this one where we don't get to pick our own vehicle. I'll fast forward, but basically I dropped some useless pieces, I compressed it down so the vehicle would be lighter. With the better speed and handling I got from that, I was just barely able to get the trophy. For the second mission, we need to race Trophy Thomas, himself. We get to bring our own vehicle, so I went into the garage for the first time. Basically, since our options are limited, I went with a very simple vehicle designed for speed, which I named Speed V1. Since it has a medium engine that I bought, we're easily able to outpace Thomas in both phases of the race for another trophy. The third and final mission involves pushing some large flaming rocks into the nearest body of water. I thought, oh right, I can carry these, so I made Carry V1, a vehicle with 2 trays. But that's not actually how you should do this. Instead, I used Speed V1 to get me to each rock as quickly as possible and simply pick them up and chuck them towards water. Because they're rocks and are thus like spherical, they can just roll into the water. It can be annoying if they don't roll all the way, but either way, this was another aced mission. Back in town again, I collected our 1 Jiggy from Thomas and the 3 from the vending machine, and turned them in, unlocking Nutty Acres Act 3, Logbox Act 2, and yet another World's Orb. As he does every so often, Mumbo also rewarded our progress with a small engine, some fuel, a gun, and some ammo. From there, I went into Nutty Acres Act 3, which had the first Grunty challenge thus far. In this challenge, we need to get the special coconut away from her. I decided to use firepower, creating Combat V1, which has a couple of egg shooters. I happened to snipe the support beam, making this a very quick victory. In addition to the expected rewards, we also get 4 high grip wheels, which are also equipped to our trolley back in town. Each Grunty mission upgrades the town trolley, though I think this is the only one that is really helpful. Either way, while in town, I deposit the Jiggy and deliver the orb to unlock World 3, Banjo-Land, and then, from there, I decided to finally enter World 2, Logbox 720.
Thank you for joining us on the Microsoft Xbox at home of Xbox.
The first mission of Act 1 has us taking Klungo's antennae as high as we can. With a flying vehicle, this would be extremely easy. Since that's illegal, I used Carry V1 to drive it along the path. Surprisingly, I got the trophy on my first try with little effort. The other mission has us picking up some passengers and delivering them back where we start, for which I made Taxi V1, which is just the speed vehicle with some passenger seats added. It's very straightforward, but I should point out how annoying it is. The NPCs can only hop into a seat if they're standing still. If you accidentally bump them or even scare them by driving up too fast, you have to wait for them to recover before they get in. Also, if you hit something, accidentally flip your vehicle, or just get out, or get into water, they'll automatically hop out. So yeah, it's very annoying, but doable for another trophy. From there, I went into Logbox Act 2. Gamer Girl Humba wants us to race against 3 opponents in a short circuit around the level. We're forced to use a bulky vehicle with crappy handling, so I of course modified it at the start. With that, I got to the goal in time for another trophy. The other mission requires us to use a vehicle that has propellers built in, and the objectives are high up on platforms that I couldn't reach on foot, meaning that this is the first undoable mission. With not much else to do here, I opted to go back to town. I turned in some Jiggies to bring our count up to 10, which unlocked another act of Nutty Acres, another act of Logbox, some useful parts from Mumbo, and a couple more items in Humba's shop, which I bought. Logbox Act 3 is another Grunty mission, but like every act, it also has a Jinjo. Jinjos, if you don't know, offer additional challenges that have you reaching a certain speed, rolling a certain distance, and so on. You then get tokens, which can be used at King Jingling's Bingo Palace. Said palace offers a number of vehicle parts and amounts of notes, but since neither are crucial to beating this challenge or the game, I opted to ignore them. As for Grunty, this is a very annoying mission. It should be easily doable with our current parts, but I could not nail down a reliable vehicle design. Falling into the water is a huge time sink, pun intended, so I decided to just come back to this later. In Nutty Acres Act 4, there happen to be 4 missions. The first one involves protecting Mr. Fit while he jogs around a hill. It's annoying but requires no jumps, so I got the Jiggy. The race started at Trophy Thomas, has me going up against Piddles the cat, and a number of small bots, so I again used Combat V1. Getting the trophy time is doable, but I settled for a Jiggy. At the center, Klungo gives us a very fun mission. So the Vaco-Nuts mission expects us to take its vacuum cart down the hill, gather up some coconuts, and ferry them back to the big coconut sucker. It's doable, but I'd rather cheat. So everything is an object, including the coconut receptacle, which means that we can pick it up if we first dislodge it. Then we just carry it down to the field and collect the coconuts directly for a stupidly easy trophy. Bottles offers a flying mission, where you're expected to use the plane to fly around through a number of high altitude gates. Hard pass. In town once more, I turned in those 4 Jiggies that we just earned into the receptacle, which brought us up to 14, which dropped the Jigoseum sphere. It also unlocked pain and frustration, because as it turns out, getting the sphere to its receptacle is really annoying. Its destination is inside of a closed off cage, and the game expects you to drive under the large magnet connected to the crane, climb up to said crane, and then move it to drop it into the short track that leads into the cage. It might be possible to circumvent the crane by carrying it up to the top of the building yourself. I, however, hit a gap that I couldn't cross, and when I dropped down and went over to try again, the ball got picked up by the magnet, and from there, I had no choice. I couldn't remove it, so I was forced to use the crane. This is annoying because the game expects you to climb using ladders that you're supposed to hop onto it. So my first idea was trolley hovering, but that was out of the question. I didn't have a good setup spot, and even if I could get it started, staying on top of the cart and getting that high while going in the right direction is just not doable, at least for me. It was exactly 1 hour later of pain and trying that I finally figured out a usable technique. It looks super dumb because it is, but like I picked up the trolley, I wedged it behind the ladder, I got into the trolley, and then depending on where the trolley was, when dismounting, it would sometimes put me in the air with time to spin attack on the ladder, or in some cases onto a higher bed of metal, which did the same thing. I'm sure there's a better way that I never came up with, but this worked. And I was able to reach the crane switch, unlocking the Jigosium without jumping. I also knocked down the crates because I'm never coming up here again. I turned in said crates and had just 2 items, the boot in a box and the ejector seats, 2 items that I specifically banned. Since I went through all that to get it unlocked, I went into Jigosium Act 1.
So, do I really look like this?
So this is a multifunctional sports arena filled with vaguely sports-related missions. The first asks us to push a bunch of sumo blocks off of a dartboard, for which I created Pusher V1. I am great at naming things. Springs would be handy, but since I can't use those, I got it done and I settled for a Jiggy. Mr. Fitt's mission asks us to drive down a large ramp and travel as far as possible. Wings are basically expected, but technically we just need to travel far, so I tried using Speed V1. It was close, but it didn't work. What actually worked was basically Speed V1, but without the blocks, and I just sent it flipping, landing me well within the Jiggy range. After turning in those 2 new Jiggies, getting us to 16, I stopped by Humba's shop, bought some combat stuff, and went over to Banjoland Act 1 because I hate going in order.
Is it me, or is that place we were just in awfully familiar?
Not to me, but this place looks like something sucked all the life and color out of it.
So this place is a huge jam-packed museum of all things Banjo and Kazooie. Luckily, almost every mission is quite grounded. The new and improved Combat V3 got me a trophy for defending Clanker's eyes, while Ice to See You was done exactly as intended for another trophy. Klongo's mission is a time trial, which Speed V2 carried me to another Jiggy. Back in town, actually collecting the Jiggies from the vending machine is a little bit annoying. You're supposed to jump up, but instead I realized I could just dismount like so to avoid that. Also, by now we're expected to have the floaties letting us smoothly sail through the water, but I opted to just carry my entire vehicle across instead. 19 Jiggies unlocks Logbox Act 4, and that's it. Into Banjoland Act 2, I went up and took on Mr. Fitt's mission, which has us driving giant soccer/footballs into the goal. The only thing standing in our way are stationary statues and some annoying enemy bots. It's a very grounded challenge, so it's very doable without jumping, but without the spring, I had to manually push them all with Pusher V2. It worked, but not well enough to get the trophy, but either way. Klonko's mission, Wasting Away, is another fun one. The game expects you to craft some kind of vehicle to lift objects into the air. Instead, one of the goofiest shortcuts in the game, you could actually just smack the large can, pick it up, turn it over, and carry the trash right into the can in like 20 seconds for an easy trophy. That's 3 more Jiggies for the collection, and also a crate for Mumbo. That crate unlocked our first set of heavy parts, which are handy whenever we want to make heavier and sturdier designs. Into Jigosium Act 2, Boggy's mission has us knocking down as many dominoes as possible. I tried a few designs, but just moving 1 or 2 lines didn't seem to work. A really good way would be to fly to the center and explode the vehicle. Since I can't fly or jump, but I still want to reach the center, I had an idea. And I created the first version of stairs. It's literally a car with a giant slope built out of vehicle blocks, which I can edit to make flush with the floor and act as stairs. And this actually got me to the center, where I realized that Banjo's attack is super weak, and this would not help me at all. Back to the garage, I made Pusher V3 with bumpers and monster truck wheels, and I just kept trying and trying until eventually I got lucky enough to get the Jiggy. Thomas's mission is a race around the arena. I crafted Speed V3 with bigger engines and spoilers to help give it as much traction as possible, but I kept having issues because it turns out I put the spoilers on backwards because it actually matters. I also added some heavy blocks and I was able to emerge with another trophy. Bottle's mission has us partaking in some pizza time. The vehicle we're given has foldable wings and propellers, so I was worried that this would be an impossible mission. Turns out, it's more than doable without flying. I left the wings in, and just simply didn't use them, and drove up and around using the sloped walls to get to the Jiggy, but looking back, I felt wrong to leave the propellers on, even if they don't change much, so I went back and redid the mission by removing the wings, propellers, and also the heavy sign, and I actually shaved an entire minute off of my time. Nice. Turning in those 3 Jiggies, our total gets up to 25, which unlocks a few more acts, as well as parts for the shop. Included in that is a large engine for 80 notes, which will be very good to unlock and use. So I made an effort to collect more notes as I went back into Logbox Act 3. Speed V3 still gave me some issues with control, but I was still able to get a Jiggy from Gruntilda without pulling out my hair, so that's a victory. In Act 4, Klungo's mission has us spraying a sponge with the level's gross pink water. It's impossible to spray it fully with a single canister's capacity, so I had to drive all the way up, refill, and come all the way back down. Without flying, the trophy is pretty rough, so again, I settled for a Jiggy. Mumbo's mission is a flying one. The vehicle is a wheelless helicopter, and the things that need cooling can mostly only be reached with flights, so this is a hard pass. Chip Chop requires it to fight off a bunch of bots, for which Combat V3 was easily able to get the trophy. Bottle's mission is interesting. We must go around and press a number of buttons. The thing is that each button requires more and more weight to activate. Scattered around are letters that spell out Banjo, which you can stack onto the vehicle to achieve the weight requirement. I almost got the trophy, but alas, I came up short. Humba's mission at the top of the level is an air race through the level, which is not happening. Back in town, I turned in the Jiggies, getting us to 29, and also a couple crates, which had some duplicates of stuff we already had, and of course I also bought the big engine. In Banjo-Land Act 3, I started by getting the Jiggy from Bottle's taxi mission done as intended. Klungo's mission is a water race, which is oddly challenging. You see, there's not a lot of ways to propel yourself through water without propellers. We can float in the water no problem, but actually moving? We don't have jets, which are banned anyways, and propellers are also out, so both vehicles ended up being a sticking point for me throughout pretty much the entire playthrough. Using a bunch of wheels to move through the water does work, but it's nowhere near as fast as you would need for most missions. As such, I left and went over to Mr. Fitz and used Speed V3 to activate a bunch of security cameras. Luckily, there's 5 of them out there and you only need to activate 3, so I was able to get the Jiggy without leaving the ground through unnatural means. Act 4 is another grunty mission. This one is fun because it's just another combat challenge. Using Combat V3, I pelted her with eggs until she finally fell down for an easy trophy. On to Act 5. Klungo's mission is an annoying race with a dumb camel looking vehicle. I pruned it down and dropped the weights and I dropped the propellers, but I was having issues coming in first because of the water sections that slowed me down considerably. I spent a good 10 minutes trying and retrying this mission, eventually emerging victorious due to some classic jank. So I ended up getting in a giant pile up with Mr. Fitz. All of our dumb camels were all tangled together, but I managed to dislodge myself and pull forward, remaining in first for a Jiggy. Bottle's mission involves gathering a bunch of sheep and delivering them back to the start, but there's bots in the way that love knocking us around. My newly upgraded carry vehicle was more than usable, but it took some trial and error before I finally achieved the trophy. Over at the pitch, Mr. Fitz challenge has us again using another dumb camel, but this one lacks any propellers, so no water, no propellers, it's a straightforward trophy. Issues aside, we ended up getting 6 Jiggies from Banjo-Land to turn in, and a crate. Also, you'll notice that our trolley now has a propeller. It's because we beat that one grunty mission. There's nothing you can do to remove it, but you're not required to use it. Like, you can get everywhere in Shutdown Town by just swimming and carrying your vehicle, so like it doesn't really change anything. But anyways, after grabbing a Jiggy from Thomas, our count reached 36, which unlocked a couple more acts. as well as some free parts, and some more stuff in Humba's shop. The crate was mostly useless. I did buy some armor and some robo fixes from the shop. On to Jigosiem Act 3, again using the nearby fence to actually reach the entrance. I started out with Mr. Fitt's mission called Brown Bears Can't Jump. Wow, rude. In this mission, you're expected to get the large basketballs through the hoop floating in the air, but I can't jump, let alone fly. It's time for my crowning achievement to come back with vengeance. Stairs. So my first tactic was to use the stairs to carry the balls up one by one and drop them in. This does work, but the hoop is too high. And also, the hoop gets higher every ball you put in, so that's more difficulty. But no fear, the hoop is an object, which means we can grab it. The winning tactic I found was just to spin it around and around, hoping that at least 3 basketballs would touch the trigger and be considered in, and it worked. With a bit of prep and better execution, you might be able to gather all the balls up into a small raised box, then bring down the hoop and get them all at once. Either way, I got it done, I got the jiggy. Anyways, as for Troferson Thomason's mission, it's another race, but this one includes a bunch of sturdy hurdles. They give you the option of going through or over, so I went through. The design I eventually made was called the Bumpinator, which is essentially a heavier version of the speed vehicle, but with some extra bumpers in front. It still handles horribly because you have to nail the right wheel setup, and I actually ran out of gas right before the finish line, which then refilled just in time, but I got the trophy. The mission World's Strongest Bear is another one that I would usually look to flying for. Instead, I made a modified version of stairs that let me drop off the stair section and then keep driving around with a little cart. That, along with some manual carrying, got me the trophy pretty easily. The last one in this act is Bottle's Shot Put mission. There's no flying needed, but when you really want to get something thrown fast, springs are ideal. Since that's not an option, I refined the Bumpinator and did my best to just absolutely slam into the thing, and it worked. After another round of Jiggy drops off, which brought the count to 40, I earned some items from Mumbo, and also a bunch of new stuff in Humba's shop. Now she has large fuel rods, large ammos, and clockwork Kaz weapons. The fourth act of Jigosiem is another grunty mission. The arena is filled with water, and she expects us to fight her in water polo. In the water? With a boat. No. Turns out actually carrying them by hand is more than doable if you just want the jiggy, which is all I was going for. And that actually gives us the scuba seat for underwater breathing. Nothing crazy, but still. Afterwards, I went exploring the town. We've progressed far enough through the game to unlock this short little water tunnel and get a free crate, and also access to a tamper switch for 1 bonus jiggy. I also collected the crate from the cave at the lake. Turning them in, I got some more weapon parts. And then also, while wandering around the Bingo Palace, which I mentioned earlier, I noticed I could tightrope across to access this crate, which would drop down, and then from here I thought, I wonder, could I trolley hover into that closed off sort of castle area? It took like 5 minutes of attempts because I had to keep setting it up manually by walking around, but yeah, you can! So I got the crate from there as well, and I turned them both in, and I got some stuff. It wasn't really worth it. From there, I went into Nutty Acres Act 5 and started Bottle's mission, which is to protect the prized statue. To do this, I designed the fortress. The idea is that this would be a vehicle made for defense and offense and not much else. I use strictly heavy blocks, which made driving an absolute pain, and also I added a bunch of armor. It has normal and grenade egg shooting out, and also a little reinforced part to carry the grenade turret. These turrets are really handy, but if you place a turret too close to the normal seat, it's very annoying getting in and out. Either way, the fortress was able to fend off all the flying enemies. A better setup and maybe better performance will probably get the trophy, but I was just happy getting the jiggy. Thomas's mission is nothing special, and I got the trophy doing things as intended. Likewise, Klongo's egg-based mission is also trophyable as intended. When it comes to Mumbo's mission, the most annoying thing is actually getting up onto the platform to talk to him in the first place. So once again, stairs came to the rescue, this time just using some floaties to let me actually get up onto them on top of the water. As for the mission, it's actually quite nice, because we just have to fight a bunch of baddies. They do expect us to use a boat, but instead I stayed still with the fortress and got them all in time for the trophy. At the top of the volcano is Old Dog New Tricks, which is a neat recreation of the Mr. Patches fight from Banjo-Tooie. I was almost positive that this challenge would be impossible, because in Tooie, Mr. Patches only turns, and you're expected to fly around him, to actually shoot out the patches. It's sort of similar here because you do have to shoot the patches, but he actually sort of rotates around and around. As such, the fortress was able to slowly pick off the weak spots for a Jiggy. I'm really glad I got it done. Lastly, Mr. Fitt's mission is more involved version of the previous one where we cheated by carrying the giant vacuum to the coconuts. This time you're supposed to retrieve nuts from atop a stack of boxes, which are actually reachable with driving. So boom, I finessed another trophy. Returning to town once more, I deposited the 6 new pieces, bringing our total to 47, which is enough to give us the final world's orb. I decided to deliver that immediately, using the intended underwater tunnel route to the uptown area. From there, I deposited 2 more Jiggies I just had sitting around, getting us to 49 before heading into Nutty Acres Act 6. So Air Coconut is a flying race where you're expected to fly. Hard pass. Riverbed head-to-head, as expected, is a race through the dried up riverbed. To satisfy my need for speed, I took the outdated Speed V3 and started adapting it. I added a large engine, increased the fuel capacity, and made it longer, and all of that lowered the center of gravity to a point where it finally earned the name Speed V4. I'm not very creative. Names aside, it easily got me the trophy. The Nuts and Go mission, given by Humba, is a straightforward land-based challenge, which I managed to get the trophy on my first try. Out on an island, Mr. Fit offers Makin' Waves, a mission that requires a speedy boat. As I mentioned before, boats are nopes, so I left it for later. At the top of the volcano, Trophy Thomas finally offers a fun mission. We're tasked with traveling as far as possible from the start with everything but our steering frozen, meaning we can't actually drive, we just have to coast. This needs a smooth aerodynamic vehicle, and Speed V4 was just the thing I needed. I only tried once, and I almost got the trophy, but more than happy just taking the Jiggy. With Act 6's options mostly exhausted, I went and deposited Jiggies, bringing us up to 52. This also gives us some free parts, including the very neat gyroscope, as well as the very versatile Suck and Blow. With that, I ventured into the final world, Terrarium of Terror. Its first mission is Bear's Eye View, which is the first time we get to use a vehicle with sails, a fuel-free propulsion device. The vehicle has springs, but they're not required to get the Jiggy. The other mission involves delivering a seed while keeping it watered. No jumping or flying required. I even got the trophy. Onwards to Tot's second act. The first mission I attempted was Intergalactic Bin Man. Cool name, dumb mission. It's very straightforward, but it took almost 10 minutes of trial and error until my creation, The Big Push, got it done in time for a trophy. Next, I took on the Great Balls of Gas mission, which, surprise, gave me some more grief. It should be simple, just carry a heavy object that gets heavier the higher you go, up a winding beanstalk. The weight gave me issues, traction was an issue. I got the Jiggy eventually, but it feels like the game won in the end. Back down again, I spoke to Officer Bacon, and he offered a mission where you get a vehicle with no wheels, you have balloons, and there's floating objectives. Hard pass. Heading over to the adjacent biodome, there are 2 missions next to each other. Captain Blubber's mission is a race that involves either jumping or flying into the air for some of the gates. It seemed out of reach, so I decided it wasn't worth the effort. Jolly's mission is actually quite doable. You need to taxi 4 people to 4 different locations, with the last being underwater. Even without flying, jumping, or propellers for underwater propulsion, I was able to do it. I even eked out the trophy. The last mission worth trying was high up, on a platform with no walking access. I was worried I wouldn't even be able to get up there in the first place, but luckily, I had speed on my side. His mission, as it happens, is the Saucer of Peril. Now here's the thing. This is a tricky one. It's pretty much the only mission in the game that I know of where you don't actually control the vehicle because it's an on-rail shooter, much like the Saucer of Peril from Banjo-Tooie. That said, the vehicle is flying, and I would benefit from its flight if I did the challenge, so I decided it was off limits. As has become tradition, once I ran out of options, I returned to town to deposit Jiggies and reevaluate from there. The TOT's Jiggies brought the count up to 58, unlocking Jiggoseum's Act 5, as well as a number of combat parts in Humba's shop. I also turned in the TT Jiggy, getting us to 59 before visiting the Jiggoseum. Just like before, Act 5 contains a single grunty mission. instead of playing water polo, Grunty wants to destroy the billiard balls, and I gotta protect them. I tried using combat vehicles, but in the end, the pusher and a bunch of evasive maneuvers got me the trophy pretty easily. With that, we've reached 60 Jiggies, which means we're just 15 away from being able to revisit Spiral Mountain for the final showdown. It also unlocked the laser for our trolley, which means we can cut through the laser walls, blocking crates throughout the town. That done, I went into Logbox Act 5. So Humba's mission is a simple driving course with a very finicky vehicle, which I got the Jiggy as intended. As for Bottle's mission, you get to drive around a literal Xbox. While it's equipped with springs, they are not required to finish, let alone get the trophy. As for the final act of this world, it has 5 missions. Humba yet again offers a race, but unlike before, the circuit is very small, so good vehicle control is crucial. Speed V4 got it done for a trophy. Bottle's mission is sort of odd. You need to carry a tablet to the top of the map, then back down through the water-filled tubes. It's annoying, but doable with our restrictions. Nearby, Mumbo tasks us with bringing 3 parts to the platform and then assembling them in the correct order. It's the first time we have to use the mobile garage feature on something other than our vehicle, but it's easily trophyable. Unfortunately, Mr. Oink's mission is way less doable. You're forced to use a vehicle with no wheels, and instead, you just have springs for mobility. Even if I took off the springs, I can't go anywhere. Also, you can't carry a passenger in the seat if you're not in the vehicle, so carrying the vehicle by hand is impossible. Hard pass. The final mission I tried was Jolly's bug-infested romp. Unlike normal combat, we needed to first disable the bugs and then place them into the bug zapper. It's annoying, but as intended, I got the trophy. Another delivery to the Great Golden Silo in the Sky brings us to 66 Jiggies. That opens the third act of Scott's Tots, so in we go. I started with Jolly's Time for a Cuppa, where you deliver stuff to places and or things. I got the trophy, no problem, as intended. Super Sally is a mission where you take a vehicle up the winding beanstalk to test its performance. I got the Jiggy and the trophy, but as you may notice, I made a mistake. The vehicle has a jet and no other engines. Without the jet, the vehicle literally cannot drive, and you can't walk all the way up due to the slippery sections, and also I think it would take too long, but either way, it's actually impossible under my rule set. As such, the Jiggy and trophy that I got are henceforth cursed, so they don't actually add to our total, and we'll make up for them before the video is through. The Hovering Harvest mission involves gathering float berries. It seems impossible, and probably is. The berries hover high enough that I just can't reach them, even with the grand stair machine and a bunch of creative maneuvers to get near them. There might be a way, but I couldn't find it. Pass. Flower Power Shower is a combat mission where you're expected to fly around and shoot bots. Much like with the previous combat missions that had a bunch of enemies, I just relied on a stationary turret to get the Jiggy without leaving the ground. Lastly, Boggy tasks us with taking his alien brother's casket down to the cooling waters beneath the plant. It seems straightforward and is, but getting down there without his forever home getting yeeted out of the vehicle is pretty rough. Turns out you can actually just place him in, edit the vehicle to have a roll cage, and then just hit every object on the way and get the Jiggy no problem. Turning those Jiggies in brings the count to 71, though keep in mind, a bit of that's cursed. It was at this time I really wanted to create a useful boat under the current restrictions. It took a half hour, but I came up with a cool design using the suck and blow, floaters, sails, and a gyro. It makes for a really fun and really fast boat, but the problem is, the rule I made about the suck and blow specified no propulsion, while this boat-based breakthrough was made a while back before I wrote the script, and thus, before I figured out every single rule I wanted. As such, for the sake of my own conscience, I will consider the subsequent Jiggy and trophy to be cursed, which now means we have 2 of each that we'll have to make up for. I went into Terrarium of Terror Act 4, and if you're curious about the numbers, this act is unlocked with 70 Jiggies, and we left Act 3 with 71 Jiggies, one of them being cursed, so we're still allowed to enter without creating a cursed Jiggy paradox. I hope that all makes sense. Anyways, Clongo's mission is a simple push object out of water setup. Got the Jiggy no problem.
The ultimate racing triathlon requires a vehicle capable of running on land, water, and in the air. Yeah, that's like not happening.
No Armed Bandits is another annoying yet doable mission involving combat. It took me a good 20 minutes of trying it, I got the jiggy. Lastly, Space Bandits Ahoy is much like the earlier Intergalactic Bidman mission, but this time the trash is moving and fighting back. Either way, I used the second blow as intended, and I got it done in time for a trophy. As soon as I left that act, I dispensed my golden pieces and then went to the town square happy because 76 jiggies is more than enough to unlock Spiral Mountain, but wait, what about the cursed collectibles? So, if we want to make things right and head into the final stretch with a clean record, we need to find 2 replacement jiggies. Also, 2 of the trophies are cursed, but it's important to know that we only get 1 jiggy for every 4 trophies. So, to replace the trophy, Unhappy Landings, I managed to do it with a trimmed down version of Speed V4 with the gyroscope and some stupid fast spinning. It was actually really fun. As for the replacement jiggies, it was actually sort of tough coming up with replacements. At least that's what I thought, before I realized I completely missed the fact that Banjo-Land Act 6 was unlocked at 59 jiggies, which we are way past. In said act, there are 6 missions available to us. Home Improvements Igloo Edition is a simple push stuff away mission, which is an easy trophy in jiggy. Excellent Racing is definitely doable, though it is annoying. Either way, I got the jiggy. Even Older Dog, Newer Tricks, yet again has its fighting Mr. Patches, and yet again, I found a way to do it without flying. The solution is stairs. Well, stairs with a sticky ball attached to the top, used to grab and drag Patches onto the cactus. It works surprisingly well, and I got the trophy in jiggy, so we've already made up what we needed. But then Ba for the Course is a really fun challenge because it's essentially golf. There's a sheep ball and you must smack it into the goal in as few hits as possible. I used the Pushnator and I actually got a solid hit onto the light slate, and then after lining it up, I got my second hit to land it right in there, so I got the trophy in jiggy. Mad Monster Mix-Up is a flying race, which is a hard pass. Lastly, Mumbo's Stunt Spectacular is an odd one. We're given an oversized motorcycle and I think for the first time in a pre-built vehicle, a gyroscope. First issue, they expect you to drive around with the added power of a small jet engine. The second issue is that they expect you to springs to jump. Third issue, they expect you to be able to control this absolute dumpster fire of a vehicle. The game does not do well with 2-wheeled vehicles. Its turning radius is trash and it falls over constantly. And that's before we start doing dumb stuff. You have to make it skid and do a mid-air forward roll. Both are done simply enough. The jumping through hoops part takes place over the ice, making handling even worse. It's annoying, but you can edit the vehicle to make Banjo sit at the highest point and just barely drive through every hoop. The one over the igloo is a huge pain. After that, you need to do a sideways roll. Since the game is pretty picky about the roll and whether or not you actually did it, you need to get some significant error to make sure it registers. You then drive through gates and then have to make a really big jump. It's all really rough, but for some reason it feels doable. I wasn't able to actually do it, but I came close to getting the notes a couple of times. Oh, and after all of that, I should also mention that Jolly Dodger is a thing. He can be found hiding near the seaside in various different spots, and he sells jiggies in exchange for notes. Each jiggy costs a bit more than the last, but it's only 325 notes for his whole stock of 5. So yeah, as I hoped and sort of expected, we can reach way more than 75 jiggies without jumping, flying, or having to use a boat. As for getting up to the Spiral Mountain door, once more a fence from over by the docks did the job. So now we just have 2 final missions that stand between us and victory. We must do logs first, as Grunty refuses to fight until it's done. This is a very daunting task. We must partake in 6 fairly different challenges, all with the same vehicle. I had no clue if this would actually be possible, so let me walk you through the process I took. First thing, I took a standard vehicle and I just sort of saw what was in order. Challenge 1 is to stay within the crown area long enough to count down the timer. Simple and straightforward, we just need a vehicle that can control pretty well. Following each of the 6 challenges is 3 questions given by log. Much like Kazooie and Tooie, this quiz challenges your knowledge of the game. The questions are random, so it's helpful to know stuff. For each question answered correctly, you'll get 5 seconds removed from your current time. Challenge 2 is simple. You just gotta take the Emerald Eye of Grunty's lair to the dumpster by Banjo's house. Challenge 3 is a bit trickier. There are a number of floating targets that must be destroyed. I'm sure the game assumes that you would fly for this, but instead, a turret will do the job with minimum effort. Challenge 4 has us going through a number of gates, some on the ground and some in the air. Luckily, none are too high up, so we don't have to fly. My first thought for some reason were stairs. It's not really ideal when you can barely control where you're going. The last 2 challenges are very doable without anything new, so let's fast forward to the final design I went with. So, the 6, as I call it, is a modified version of Speed V4. I gave it some ammo and a grenade egg turret near the front. In the back is a sticky ball, a very useful gadget that I barely utilized throughout the playthrough. From the center engine, I have a detacher connected to a number of blocks that stick right into the air. With that, I could just drop off the blocks during Challenge 1 and Challenge 2 so that they wouldn't weigh me down. For Challenge 3, I hopped out, I modified my vehicle, and I had the turret at the top. I also dropped the seat nearby so that the turret was the only thing I could enter, letting the game just sort of zoom me up to the turret's advantageous spot. I did have to move the vehicle by hand for the last target, and I did fall over, but I got it done. Challenge 4 started normal. I detached the blocks after the first loop to drive around the moat. The first elevated gate is back near there, so I used the RB button to repair and then once more modified the vehicle. This time I dropped the turret and I put the seat at the top. The game only cares if Banjo himself touches the gate, so this works perfectly fine. Challenge 5 is another grab item and deliver it kind of challenge. This time it's 3 honeycombs. While a box or tray might be useful, we can actually activate the sticky ball and manually place the honeycombs onto it. I also got a turnip and a bot along for the ride, but I was still able to scale Spiral Mountain without issue. Finally, the easiest challenge yet. All we have to do is get all of the cauliflower blocks out of the zone. I could have edited my vehicle to turn the blocks into a pushing wall, but no need. I did this one all by myself. With that victory behind us, all that is left is to triumph against Gruntilda without jumping, or flying, or the propeller. Since this is a showdown, combat is the focus. Gruntilda has 5 different vehicles that we must fight off using the same one vehicle. When crafting my own battle bot, I started by adding 3 large ammo containers, 2 large fuel rods, 2 large engines, and a sturdy seat. Next, there was a replenisher which would gradually refill my ammo, and a RoboFix which would gradually repair the vehicle. As for actual firepower, I added my single torpedo, all 6 of my grenade egg launchers, and then even more ammo because why not? I even added my single clockwork Kaz which fires automatically at nearby enemies. It doesn't do a lot of damage, but it's something. For some reason I went without adding a trailer hitch and an egg turret, but either way. So she starts with a monster trap. Big wheels means big targets, so disabling this one is not too difficult. Her pirate ship is a little tougher since it floats in Spiral Mountain's little lake. A turret would probably be smarter and safer, but I just sort of threw myself into the water, exploding both of her vehicles at the same time. It still counts. Her third vehicle is capable of going invisible. That said, it's still possible to see her just barely, meaning that this is more of an inconvenience than anything else, so that was also easily destroyed. Her fortress is pretty laughable considering it remains nearly motionless, meaning I was able to just let loose with all the guns. I couldn't even tell what was happening with all those explosions. Finally, she rides atop her broomstick-esque machine, and as such, she's in the air the whole time. Since I cannot follow her into the air, I edited my vehicle to have the torpedo and guns face skyward, and then just sort of flailed around until luck, timing, and more luck finally brought her down. So yeah, what a way to end this trilogy of jumpless challenge videos. At first, the jumps were counted in triple digits, and then single digits, and now 0 digits, because we did it. We beat Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts without jumping, or flying, or springs, or even a boat, but you get the idea. Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video, assuming you're still awake. If not, well, good, that was kind of the goal. Regardless, have a nice night, and I hope you'll tune in again sometime. Goodbye.